Chapter 972. Rinpoche, who had already expected this, covered his face with both hands. Fortunately, they weren't in a fight, and she only used a little strength to scratch him, compared to her. As a result, he only had 2 more scratches on his arm. Then Lin Xiaola exclaimed, "Aya, why are you here?" It smelled like a northeastern man. Previously, when he went to the northeast, he couldn't change it. Then, Rinpoche felt a gust of wind blow past his back. The bag of sweets hanging on his back was gone. Lin Xiaola squatted on the roof and rummaged through the bag. She found 2 pieces of liquor chocolates and peeled them off before stuffing them into her mouth. Her cheeks immediately puffed up. As expected, there's no need to worry about you. Rinpoche shook his head slightly. Although it was called labor reform, it was actually just a change of place to sleep. Furthermore, he didn't have to worry about the sudden arrival of the Empress. It was even more comfortable than staying in the palace. After eating 2 pieces of liquor chocolate, Lin Xiaola's face visibly became rosy, and her eyes became a little blurred. She snorted twice, fell on the roof, and continued to sleep. Rinpoche almost burst out laughing. Even a drop of alcohol would make her drunk, yet she still liked the liquor chocolate, second only to the white rabbit creamy candy. This time, he woke up for less than 10 seconds. Rinpoche shook his head and ignored her. He jumped down from the roof and saw that there were a few more people around him. One of them was the supervisor of this mine. "Greetings, Zhao Prince Consort." The man cupped his hands in greeting. "Yes, we're all acquaintances." Rinpoche nodded his head. He had dealt with them the last time he was here. The other party looked at him with mixed feelings. Back then, the person in front of him had just been chosen as Her Majesty's husband. Now, he had become Dayo's Zhao Prince Consort. Back then, he couldn't even defeat an ordinary person, but now, he had the strength of a Kismet heaven expert. Back then, he had a head full of lush hair, but now, he had become a bird's egg. This was the vicissitudes of the world. Rinpoche didn't know that the other party, who was 2 meters tall and had a big beard, had suddenly become a hipster. "Where is Exinja?" "He's in the mine. I've already sent someone to invite him." Although General Exinja was sent to the mines, how could we order her around? Ever since she came, she's been in the mine all day long, working even harder than the convicts. Rinpoche nodded. That was true. With Exinja's cardinal heaven strength, who could order her around? Wasn't Lin Xiaola sleeping on the roof of the house? Only someone with Exinja's rigid character could obediently go to the mine every day. Not long after, Exinja was brought out of the mine. He was dressed in coarse clothes, and his hair was casually tied behind his head. There was some dust on his body, but he didn't look sloppy. Instead, he gave off a refreshing feeling. He felt that this was probably because she was beautiful. "Zhao Prince Consort, you are here." Exinja cupped her hands and greeted Rinpoche. "Aren't you curious why I'm here?" Rinpoche asked with a smile. "Strange," Exinja replied honestly. "Why aren't you wearing your glasses?" It's not convenient. You can still recognize me." "Not bad." Rinpoche remembered that Exinja couldn't see anything clearly from a meter away. "It's mainly because the reflection is brighter. I can see the reflection." Rinpoche felt that this reason left him speechless. "Disperse." Rinpoche waved his hand at everyone and said to Exinja, "Come over and talk." After finding a remote place to sit down, he said, "I came over to see how the 2 of you are doing. It seems like Lin Xiaola is living a much more comfortable life than you." Exinja looked up at the front without saying a word. Her eyes were full of mosaics. "Do you blame Her Majesty?" Rinpoche tilted his head and looked at her. "Why would I? I didn't protect you well." Exinja was a little surprised. Her Majesty had no choice. Meritorious deeds must be rewarded, and mistakes must be punished. You can't be blamed for the accident this time, but Her Majesty wants to punish you. Otherwise, this team will be difficult to lead. Rinpoche chuckled. "I won't have any thoughts that I shouldn't have." Exinja shook her head. "Besides, I didn't protect you well. If anything happens to you, I will avenge you first and then kill myself to apologize." "You're exaggerating." "Well, Rinpoche shook his head and sighed when he saw that she was serious. Everything about her was good, but she was too serious. You don't have to be too hard on yourself. Bask in the sun with Lin Chaola and practice martial arts when you have nothing to do. After 3 years, you will be a good man again. It would be a waste to leave you here to mine. Mining is also a form of practice, Exanja said faintly. Rinpoche put this topic aside when he heard her say this. Is it inconvenient to stay here? He thought about it seriously and shook his head. Rinpoche lay down in the grass behind him, looked at the blue sky above his head, and stretched out his hand to block the sun. Sunlight flowed in through the gaps between his fingers. He sighed in his heart. Exanja was too serious and had too few desires. After a while, Exanja suddenly asked, Zhao Prince Consort, did you bring seasonings? Hungry? Rinpoche turned to look at her. Exanja, who was sitting there quietly, was actually quite pleasing to look at. Someone is dying and wants to eat something good, Exanja said faintly. Rinpoche was a little surprised by such a humane answer. He turned his head back and continued to look at the sky. I thought you would be hungry, so I brought you some seasonings. Remember not to put too much, or else it will taste like seasonings and you won't be able to eat it. Oh! Exanja responded faintly and fell silent again. After a while, Exanja got up and patted her butt. I'm going to mine. She waited for a few breaths, but Rinpoche didn't reply. She turned her head and only saw a mosaic. She carefully sensed that Rinpoche's breathing was stable and seemed to be asleep. After thinking about it, Exanja went back to her room to get her glasses and finally saw clearly. She stood there and looked at Rinpoche in a daze. She was very surprised that he would come to see her. She was a little surprised and pleasantly surprised. It was the same feeling she had when she first put on her glasses. After standing there for a while, Exanja returned to her original position and began to daydream. After 2 hours, Rinpoche's breathing began to change and he gradually woke up. Exanja got up and said, I'm going to mine. Without waiting for his reply, she disappeared in a flash. Rinpoche was still in a daze, and when he woke up, Exanja was nowhere to be seen. At night, Lin Chaola finally woke up. She held the bag of sweets tightly and asked Rinpoche pitifully, will there be no more after I finish them? That's right. Rinpoche nodded. Lin Chaola looked even more bitter. She looked down and opened the bag, carefully counted the sweets, poured them on the ground, and arranged them one by one. She counted with her fingers how many days it would take to eat one. Seeing her pitiful look, Rinpoche could only say, eat them. These things have a shelf life, and you can't eat them after that. I will get someone to send you some more in a few months. Lin Chaola was overjoyed to hear this, and snot bubbles came out of her nose. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 973. Rinpoche stayed at the mine for a day before returning to Lon City. It took him half a month to go back and forth, and he stayed for less than 24 hours. However, Rinpoche felt that it was worth it. Both of them were dismissed by the Empress and sent to the mine because of him. After returning to Lon City, Rinpoche started to get busy again. The Imperial Grocery Store was renamed the Imperial Department Store, and there were many new products. White granulated sugar, flour, rice, soybeans, sweet potato wine, fruit wine, vermicelli, soy sauce, sesame oil, canned fish and beef, dried salted fish, and a series of agricultural products and agricultural products. The sweet potato wine and fruit wine were sold out as soon as they were introduced. Next were sugar, soy sauce, and sesame oil. Alcohol and seasonings were the favorites of the Aboriginals. The current production of these products wasn't large, and even Lon City's demand couldn't be met. However, they made the Imperial Department Store famous. Regardless of whether they were Aboriginals or the Jing tribe, the Imperial Department Store was a must-visit place in Lon City. In addition, there was another extremely important product, cotton cloth. Unfortunately, it wasn't paid much attention to. It was too expensive for ordinary people, and it was far inferior to silk and satin for officials. However, Rinpoche didn't care. New things would always change the world little by little. These cotton cloth were produced in an experimental plot, and it would take some time to grow them on a large scale. Although looms were easy to make, it was impossible to hire weavers. It would take a few years for cotton cloth to be sold at a low price on the market. This time, he just wanted to let the people know that there was such a thing. For this reason, he specially wore a t-shirt for a month. There were 6 big words printed on the back, number 6 in the world. This made the students from the academy laugh even harder. However, it didn't take long for him to see some of the students from the academy wearing t-shirts like him. However, the material of their clothes couldn't be compared to the ones Rinpoche brought back from Earth. They were a little yellow and wrinkled. They were comfortable to wear, but not aesthetically pleasing. After a few days, no one wore them anymore. No one was wearing cotton anymore, but many people were wearing improved silk t-shirts. Or rather, a half-sleeved mandarin jacket was more suitable. After all, even though it wasn't difficult to make a t-shirt, it wasn't easy to make it look good. Therefore, clothes like the mandarin jacket naturally appeared. This kind of clothing was easy to wear, convenient, comfortable, breathable, and looked novel. Most importantly, it saved on fabric. Within a short period of time, this trend had spread from the academy to the entire Lon City. Middle and lower class officials wore silk cloths, while the commoners wore coarse cloths. As for the middle and upper echelons, they naturally wore loose robes with large sleeves. According to their simple values, the more cloth one wore, the richer they were. Seeing this situation, Rinpoche pondered for a moment and waved his hand. Half a month later, a batch of cotton underwear appeared in the imperial grocery store. Recently, the empress had been rather restless. Whenever she sat there, she would frown and often get distracted. This made Rinpoche a little worried. He did not know what had happened to cause the usually heroic empress to become like this. "Your Majesty, what's wrong? Look at you, your forehead is full of wrinkles recently." On this day, Rinpoche took some time out to accompany the empress to sunbathe in the garden and listen to tunes. The empress was speechless. "I might be giving birth." The empress thought for a while and finally decided to tell him. "Ah!" Rinpoche was stunned at first. Then he widened his eyes and looked at the empress in disbelief. "You're giving birth?" One had to know that the empress had been pregnant for 35 months. From January 3 years ago to November 3 years later, Rinpoche had almost gotten used to the fact that there was a ball in the empress's stomach. He had forgotten about the birth of a child. Now that the empress said that she was about to give birth, Rinpoche immediately felt somewhat incredulous. What seemed to be a very distant matter was suddenly brought to the front of his eyes. It was just like when he was in school and felt that getting married and having a child was something that only happened in movies. It was too far away. And now, this feeling appeared again. These days, that ball has been absorbing my energy and has become faintly discernible. I feel that I should be giving birth soon. The empress was a little distressed. How should I give birth to a child? These words pulled Rinpoche back from his daze. He first took a few deep breaths to suppress the trembling in his heart. He did not know if he was excited or nervous. However, one thing was for sure, he finally didn't have to be forced to go to the andrology department by the 2 devils at home. "Your Majesty, are you going to give birth?" Rinpoche asked. Then he let out a long breath and said, "Finally." The empress cast a sidelong glance at him and spat at him. She then continued to frown and became anxious after a while. "How should I give birth to a child?" Rinpoche pondered. He crossed his arms and said, "Although I know how to give birth to a child, I don't know how to give birth to a ball." "Get lost." The empress was flustered and kicked Rinpoche into the flowering shrubs. Rinpoche crawled out with grass all over his body and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, don't worry. Those midwives definitely know." "I don't need them," the empress said thoughtfully, "but I can still ask them." "Your Majesty, it's better to be careful. Let the midwives get ready," Rinpoche said. The empress ignored him. She had no intention of finding a midwife to deliver the child and felt uncomfortable. Moreover, she was the 4th most powerful expert in the world. How could she not even handle the matter of giving birth? Rinpoche guessed what she was thinking when he saw her expression and knew that it wasn't easy to persuade her. However, giving birth to a child was indeed a troublesome matter. With the midwives by her side, he reckoned that if she was in pain, she would probably be kicked to death. It was also inauspicious. After thinking for a while, he said, "Your Majesty, follow me back to Earth. There's more information on this aspect there. Your Majesty can also do a checkup." "There's no need for a checkup." The Empress rejected him at first, then nodded and asked, "When are we leaving?" "Tonight." At night, Rinpoche brought the Empress back to Earth. First, he asked someone to invite the gynecologist from last time. At the same time, he went online to search for information for the Empress. The Empress glanced at it. It was roughly a natural birth and a cesarean section. She immediately knew what to do. Originally, she was anxious because she didn't know how to give birth to a child. Now that she knew, it was easier to handle. The gynecologist also arrived at the right time. "I don't want to see her." The Empress was no longer gloomy and directly rejected. "Since you are already here, why don't you meet her?" Rinpoche persuaded. "I don't want to see her." The Empress was very stubborn. She didn't like to discuss giving birth to a child with others. After all, this was a very personal matter for her and very difficult to talk about. In Dayo, which had a tough atmosphere, people like the Empress were considered different. "All right, I will go and meet her." "I can't let her make a wasted trip," Rinpoche said helplessly. Rinpoche went to see the gynecologist and asked her about the situation of the birth. The gynecologist first suggested to go to the hospital for a checkup and then told him some things. As Rinpoche listened, he began to frown. Although he knew that giving birth was troublesome, he didn't expect it to be this troublesome. After the gynecologist left, Rinpoche sat for a while before gradually relaxing his frown. He didn't have to worry about most of the dangerous situations during the birth. For example, the umbilical cord around the neck, umbilical cord prolapse, improper fetal position. The Empress's stomach was a ball. How could a ball have these problems? In fact, there was only one kind of danger for the Empress, and that was amniotic fluid embolism. However, it was unknown whether the Aboriginals had this problem. But then again, would there be other problems during the birth of the Aboriginals? Was it on Earth or in Dayo? If it was on Earth, with Earth's technology and the Empress's control over her body, it shouldn't be a problem if she encountered an amniotic fluid embolism. However, with the Empress's physical condition, her skin couldn't even be pierced by a needle. He wasn't sure how far Earth's technology could go. If anything happened in Dayo, there were experts like Tu-Wan who could help. Both sides had their pros and cons. Just as the balance in Rinpoche's heart was still wavering, the Empress's expression suddenly changed on the 7th day after returning to Earth. Her whole face was abnormally solemn, as if she was about to welcome a great enemy. "I'm going to give birth." Recommended a friend's book, "I Am the Boss Behind the Scenes." Lu Wu, who had inherited the legacy of the great ancestor of the netherworld, was very worried recently. This was because, apart from the title of His Excellency, the great ancestor didn't leave anything behind. Even his original subordinates had all betrayed him and divided up the territory that originally belonged to him. Under such circumstances, Lu Wu relied on the artifact developed by the great ancestor to start building the game server, guiding the players from the netherworld to create main missions, instance dungeons, plots, NPCs, and so on. Relying on the strength of the players, he began his road of conquest. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 974. I'm going to give birth. The Empress looked as if she was facing a formidable enemy. Rinpoche, who was already hesitant, panicked when he heard this. What should he do? Return to Dayo? Or stay on Earth? What are you waiting for? The Empress frowned and looked at Rinpoche. Go to the hospital? His first reaction was to go to the hospital. He hadn't paid back the lessons he had received for more than 20 years. The Empress glared at him and asked, "What hospital? Do you have medicine?" "What medicine?" Rinpoche broke out in a cold sweat. He was confused because of his concern. The Empress's physique was different from ordinary people. What should he do if she was suddenly going to give birth? How could she give birth without going to the hospital? What if something went wrong? Black mud cream. Yes. Rinpoche forced himself to calm down. The problem was, what did the Empress want this medicine for? Give it to me. The Empress glared at him again. Rinpoche teleported to retrieve the medicine, took it, and returned to his room. Stand guard outside. Rinpoche started to sweat again. What was the Empress going to do? Forget it, he should call the hospital first. The hospital wasn't very reliable. Forget it, he should call the Messier 87 department. He fumbled for his phone and dialed Yang Sen's number. At this time, the Empress returned to her room, slowly took off her clothes, lay on the bed, and used a pillow to prop up her back so that she could see her belly. She then took a deep breath and touched her belly to feel it. Following which she used her finger to cut her belly. Blood immediately gushed out. The Empress looked calm and continued to perform inhuman operations. First, she controlled the muscles around the wound to stop the bleeding. She omitted the bloody scene at the end. In just a short while, she took out a sphere that was bigger than a basketball. The sphere was red on the outside, and it was somewhat elastic when pressed. It didn't look like flesh and blood, but more like condensed water. The moment she took it out, the sphere blossomed with red light and dyed the entire room red. Following which, it trembled slightly. The air in the entire room began to rotate. In other words, there was a sudden gust of wind around the entire building. The passers-by were alarmed and found that the air here seemed to have formed a whirlpool. And the center of the whirlpool was this building. Many of the winged cavalry warriors and cadets in the building didn't feel anything at first, but they soon realized that there was a strong gale outside the window. However, there was nothing unusual in here. Even when the windows were opened, there wasn't any gale blowing into the room. This strange phenomenon puzzled everyone. At this moment, the Empress carefully placed the ball to one side. A layer of sweat emerged from her forehead and slid down. It would be easy to take out the ball. Previously, she was very careful because she was afraid of hurting the thing in her stomach. After that, he moved his fingers and smeared the black mud cream on the wound. After a few minutes, he released the wound and smeared the medicine on the surface of his stomach. After doing all this, the Empress was completely relaxed. He turned his head to look at the ball beside him. At this moment, a strong gust of wind was sweeping through the room, blowing everything away. And the cause of all this was this little thing. The Empress clapped her hands, and all the windows in the room were blasted open. The strong wind outside rushed in without any obstruction. Then, he carefully observed the ball on the bed with a hint of a smile in his eyes. This little guy was his descendant? It was much scarier than when he was born. Absorbing his blood essence for 3 years was not in vain. Your Majesty? Rinpoche kicked open the door and rushed in. The first thing he saw was the Empress lying on the bed and staring at a glowing red ball. One of the Empress's legs was even raised and moving backward. Your Majesty? Rinpoche was a little confused. He had just ended the call when he heard the sound of glass exploding in the room. He was so shocked that he hurriedly kicked open the door and came in. But what was the situation now? What was the situation with this ball? Gave birth? So fast? The Empress lay on the bed, turned her head to look at him, smiled, and said, "It's over." Gave birth? Rinpoche asked subconsciously. Isn't this it? The Empress pouted at the ball on the bed. At this moment, other than the bedsheet on one side of her, the other bedsheets were almost wrapping it. The Empress got up from the bed and stood there naked. She picked up her clothes and slowly put them on. At this moment, Rinpoche saw the black mud cream on the Empress's stomach. Rinpoche immediately quivered and his brain almost exploded. Your Majesty, did you disembowel yourself? Rinpoche was horrified. Although he had thought of this possibility before, he still felt that it wasn't very possible. If the Empress controlled her own muscles and gave birth to this ball, Rinpoche felt that it was more normal. But the Empress actually performed a cesarean section on herself? Isn't it just these two methods? The Empress looked at him strangely and didn't know why he had such a big reaction. Rinpoche opened his mouth. He didn't know whether he should pay attention to the Empress or the ball. Your Majesty, do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Has the wound healed? Ren Baqian asked cautiously. It's a little itchy, but it's not a big deal. The Empress waved her hand. It wasn't like Ren Baqian hadn't used this thing before. Naturally, he knew that even though it healed quickly, it was a form of torture when the wound healed. It wasn't just itchy, it was as if 10,000 ants were crawling and biting on it. However, the Empress looked so relaxed as if this wasn't happening to her. Ren Baqian fixed his gaze on the Empress. He couldn't even feel the surrounding gale. He only felt that the Empress at this moment was exceptionally heroic. This made his heart pound. It wasn't until the Empress put on her clothes that she came back to her senses. She turned her head to look at the room where the gale was blowing and the red ball that was at the center of everything. Is this my son? Ren Baqian muttered to himself. Of course. The Empress glared at him unhappily. What's going on? He seems to be absorbing something, but I've never heard of it before. The Empress was also a little curious. How long is this going to last? Ren Baqian looked out of the window and saw that a tornado was about to form. The dust that filled the sky was swept into the house along with the gale. There were even cigarette butts. And waste paper. This was really a change in weather. In the past, he had heard people say that there would be strange phenomena when someone made a sound, but that was all bragging. This time, it was real. At this time, the people downstairs finally realized that this strange phenomenon was coming from the top floor, where Zhao Prince Consort and the Empress lived. Many of the winged cavalry warriors were shocked and rushed to the top floor. Ren Baqian heard someone kick the door open. He turned around and saw many winged cavalry warriors rushing in. Zhao Prince Consort, what happened? Many of the winged cavalry warriors were flustered. Ren Baqian coughed twice and solemnly said, Her Majesty has given birth. Huh? What? Everyone exclaimed in shock. How is Her Majesty? She's fine. Ren Baqian replied. Stand guard outside. The Empress's faint voice came from the room. Ren Baqian turned around and entered the room. He saw the Empress sitting cross-legged on the bed and staring at the ball as if she was staring at something strange and interesting. Although this was her son, it was indeed strange and interesting. After a full 15 minutes, the suction from the ball suddenly stopped, and the wind that blew into the room suddenly became chaotic. However, the wind had lost its source and quickly dissipated. The room was already unsightly as cigarette butts, paper, and rubbish were everywhere. However, Ren Baqian didn't care about this at all. He stared at the ball that was beginning to dim and asked, Your Majesty, what should we do? Should we find a kitchen knife to cut it open? How dare you? The Empress glared at him fiercely. Then, are we just going to wait? Ren Baqian asked. The Empress fell into deep thought. At this moment, a cracking sound was suddenly heard from the ball. A thin crack appeared on the ball. Baidu search 081 Chinese language website yen. No advertising message. Chapter 975. Look, what's going on? In an office, a middle-aged man clicked on a projection, and 5 images appeared in the air. All 5 images showed scenes of the city. Others could recognize at a glance that it was the same city. Wuji City, one of the most mysterious cities on Earth. At this time, the positions of the 5 images were also different. The most attractive one was in one of the images. A building was surrounded by a wind pillar. Countless leaves, and dust made the wind pillar appear colorful. Outside this wind pillar, strong winds swept toward this location from all directions of the city. It was as if there was a giant Kuan here that wanted to suck the entire world in one gulp. As the images moved, it could be seen that the wind pillar wasn't only on the ground but also in the sky. A funnel-shaped cloud appeared in the sky above the city and was constantly rotating. The center of all this was the top floor of that building. As for the other scenes in the images, they weren't affected much. At most, they could feel some movement of the wind. Only that building. Furthermore, it was in the center of the city. Everyone could conclude that this couldn't be natural. This is the position of that person. Someone immediately said. That's right. What exactly happened to produce such a great force? This suction is hundreds of times greater than that of the wind tunnel. It's definitely not human power. In other words, if someone had such power, that person would be a god. Could it be that the passage has opened? It would make sense if the passage caused such a scene. What passage? Don't ask too much. Have you sent people to check the other tall buildings and see if they can see anything? If the passage has really opened, then this world will change greatly. Let Yang-sun inquire about it. He has some friendship with that person. There were more than a dozen people in the room. Some were worried, some were thoughtful, some were restless, and some were confused. 2 hours later, the man pressed a button, and Yang-sun appeared on the screen. Yang-sun looked much stronger now, and his face was angular, as if he had become more than 10 years younger. Stop guessing. The Empress has given birth, Yang-sun said as soon as he appeared on the screen. The Empress was what they called Cheesy Xiao now. After all, they could guess some things from the words of Rinpoche and the others. In particular, Rinpoche kept referring to Her Majesty this and Her Majesty that every day. It was fine if it was just 1 or 2 days, but now that it had been almost 20 years, everyone would be fools if they still didn't know. As for Rinpoche's identity, was there a need to ask? The prince of a country. However, what they didn't know was how much power the countries in that world controlled. In any case, there were nearly 100 earthwheel experts in that building. If they were thrown into any city in this world, it would cause a disaster. Give birth. Everyone was shocked. Impossible. I'm afraid it's true, Yang-sun said with a bitter smile. He called me before. He was a little worried. In the end, it happened in less than 2 minutes. I can see that there are people monitoring the upper floors of each building. There are indeed no passageways. After the man finished speaking, he used another device to project a few pictures. One of them was a woman in red standing in front of a broken window. Her eyes were filled with murderous intent as she looked in this direction. Even though everyone was looking at this picture, they could feel the bone-piercing killing intent coming from the other side of the picture, causing them to tremble all over. I was too rash. However, after all, it's such a big matter. He should be able to understand, Yang-sun said faintly. He understood Rinpoche very well. As long as no one provoked him, he was actually very content. After so many years, both parties had been very happy working together. The other party wasn't an inconsiderate person. If this investigation was discovered by the other party, he would probably have to apologize and explain himself. Following that, there was another picture that was slightly slanted, and one could see a baby sitting on the bed. The important thing wasn't the baby, but the bulging muscles on the baby's body. Without seeing this picture, no one could imagine that a baby would actually have bulging muscles, just like a bodybuilder. In addition, there was another thing. The baby had an extremely long head of hair that almost tied itself up a few times. The man was amazed as he untied the hair that was tied up on the baby. The next picture was of the Empress bending over to pick something up. There was another picture of the Empress making a throwing motion. There was nothing else after that. Just these few pictures? We were discovered by the other party, so we can't take any more pictures. Furthermore, the man's expression was a little strange. Do you know where this picture was taken? Zhongda Building. That's right, it was 6 kilometers away from that building. However, the other party actually threw a stone over. 6 kilometers and a stone was thrown over. Just thinking about this number was terrifying. This strength was simply inhuman. It simply ignored the laws of gravity. Are they all right? Someone asked. Our people are fine. The man's expression was a little strange. Our people are in the easternmost room of Zhongda Building, and the one that was hit was the one on the west side. Everyone thought about it. Zhongda Building was more than 400 meters wide from east to west. Their strength was terrifying, and their accuracy was also terrifying. However, they still didn't dare to let their guard down. One had to know that this was 6 kilometers away. Not only did the other party discover their investigation, but he also actually threw a stone over. How much strength did this require? How fast did this require? It looked like it was more than 400 meters off course, but at this distance, Zhongda Building was only as thick as an electric pole in the eyes of the other party. It wasn't unreasonable for it to be so off course. Everyone discussed for a while, and they felt a deep sense of reverence for the legendary Empress. Then, they began to wonder, that child doesn't look like a newborn. It's indeed a newborn. Yang Sun opened his mouth and said, that body of muscles and such long hair, how could it be a newborn? I know that you guys find it hard to believe, and I find it hard to believe too. However, to be able to have such a momentum at birth, it naturally won't be the same as ordinary people, Yang Sun said slowly. He dared to say this because he naturally had his own sources of information. Everyone had different expressions. They didn't dare to believe it, but they couldn't doubt it. After a long time, someone suddenly said, if there really is such a phenomenon at birth, then he simply isn't human. When he grows up, won't he be a god? As soon as this was said, everyone's expression changed. If that was really the case, then it was simply terrifying. Don't think too much. Also, don't investigate him anymore. We aren't on the same level. Yang Sun warned everyone and turned off the screen in front of him. There were still many things he had to do next. Not only did he have to report to the higher-ups, but he also had to contact the other party. He also had to think carefully about what kind of gift to give. Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 976. Crack. Along with the sound, a thin crack appeared on the red ball. Crack. Crack. Numerous cracks appeared on the red ball. Rinpoche looked at this scene in amazement and inexplicably thought of a chick coming out of its shell. It was actually oviparous. Oviparous? Really? Rinpoche didn't know what to think. Well, he knew that this little thing had absorbed too much blood from the Empress and wrapped itself up. However, this scene in front of him looked like it was oviparous. He looked at the Empress who was lying there with her face almost stuck to the shell. Boom. Suddenly, a fist came out of the shell and hit the Empress's nose. The Empress immediately widened her eyes and raised her hand to slap, but when she thought that this was her own child, she put her hand down and put it behind her back lest she couldn't help but slap it. However, the distance between her and the little thing was a little too far. Another hole appeared on the shell, and another fist came out. Both fists were pinched at the edge of the shell. Tearing, holding, pulling, pushing, knocking. All kinds of martial arts were used. Then, a cry came from the shell. Your Majesty, do you want to help him open it? Rinpoche felt an inexplicable pain in his heart when he heard this cry. Let him do it himself. The Empress continued to stare at the ball curiously and said, this is my child, and there was such a strange phenomenon when he was born. How could he be trapped? Rinpoche thought for a while and gave Yang Sun a call to tell him that he didn't need help. At the same time, he happily told the other party, I'm a father. At this time, a sense of joy rushed up from the bottom of his heart. Then, he called the two great demons at home and said, both of you are grandparents. Rinpoche's parents were dumbfounded when they received the call. There wasn't any news before. How did he suddenly give birth? They were at a loss at first, then became vigilant and said, don't tell me you got him from somewhere to lie to us? Rinpoche almost choked to death. Biological. Listen, he's biological, not a gift from topping up a phone, not from a trash can, not from playing games, he's my biological child. I didn't tell you before because I wanted to give you a surprise. Well, you don't have to come anymore. Come back in half a month. Rinpoche calculated the time and felt that it was time for him and the Empress to leave. All right, we still have something to do. We're not at home and we know that you can go anywhere. It's really inconvenient for me to come here. I'll go to Wuji City to see my grandson in half a month. While Rinpoche was making the call, his eyes never left the ball. After struggling for a few minutes, more and more cracks appeared on the ball's shell. Soon after, 2 feet were exposed. Then, a hole appeared at the top of the spherical shell, and a tearful little face appeared from inside. With his eyes open, she looked at the Empress and then at Rinpoche. Then, with a wah sound, she cried again, her voice full of grievance. However, to others, this shout sounded like an explosion, and Rinpoche's head was ringing from the shock. The glass on the 3 floors below exploded. At this time, near the building, many people looked up at the sky. The cry of a child seemed to have fallen from the sky. The Empress didn't care about this cry and looked at the little fellow with a smile. Rinpoche had seen the heroic Empress, the murderous Empress, the cold Empress, the gentle Empress, the charming Empress. This was the first time he had seen the Empress beaming with joy. Indeed, he had never seen one before. It was too rare. Your Majesty, do you feel that this child's legs and hands seem to have muscles? Rinpoche suddenly discovered a problem. Previously, he didn't notice that the child only stretched out his fists, but now, his forearms and calves were all stretched out. Rinpoche seemed to see muscles. And there were quite a few of them. Who doesn't have muscles? The Empress beamed at the little fellow and didn't even look at Rinpoche. Rinpoche scratched his bald head. Were Aboriginals born with muscles? He hadn't heard of it. Seeing that the two of them were ignoring him, the little fellow wrapped himself in the spherical shell and used all his strength to roll, throw a tantrum, and jump. He jumped 5 meters high. Boom! His head was stuck in the roof. Rinpoche sucked in a breath of cold air. Fortunately, there was a suspended ceiling above. The little fellow was dancing in the air, and Rinpoche couldn't stand it anymore. He leaped up and pulled the little fellow down by its legs. Then, the little fellow kicked its legs, and Rinpoche felt a strong force. He couldn't hold on any longer and threw the little fellow against the wall. After that, the Empress kicked its stomach hard and sent it flying through the wall. When Rinpoche crawled back after rolling around for a long time, the spherical shell on the little fellow's body was already broken. He didn't know if it was broken by himself or by the Empress. In any case, Rinpoche felt that he had been wronged. However, the thing that attracted his attention the most was the little fellow on the bed. Its long hair was spread everywhere like weeds, and part of it was even tied up. Rinpoche estimated that it was at least 2 to 3 meters long. He finally knew why it was so difficult for the little fellow to come out. There was so much hair in the spherical shell, and it would be strange if it could exert any strength. Rinpoche stretched his face over and looked at the little fellow carefully. The little fellow's face didn't look like that of a newborn child, which was normal. Its face was chubby, very fair, and had single eyelids. Above its eyes were 2 faint eyebrows that looked like sword-like eyebrows. As for the rest of its body, it was all tied up by its hair. The little fellow looked up at him and then lowered its head to wrestle with its hair. He felt that there was a strange smell on the little fellow's body. It was like the delicate fragrance of the Empress, but it also had some other smells. He reached out to touch the little fellow's head again. The little fellow stopped wrestling with its hair, looked up at him, and burst into tears. Rinpoche looked embarrassed and said, "I'm your father. Why are you crying?" He turned to look at the Empress and asked, "Is it a boy or a girl? Can you tell?" The Empress asked. "Help him untie it." Rinpoche rolled up his sleeves and went forward to help. When the little fellow saw that he was helping to untie its hair, it immediately beamed with joy and even snot bubbles came out of its nose. "It's all right, unlike me. I was worried that it would be bald," Rinpoche mumbled as he untied its hair. "This hair, how did you manage to wrap yourself up in your mother's womb with a ball of hair? You are also a talent." Rinpoche suddenly froze and looked incredulous as he brushed aside some of the hair. He saw that under the clumps of hair were muscles that looked like coiled dragons. He would believe it if it was said that the Aboriginals had muscles when they were born. However, the bulging blue veins and blood vessels were like dragons. Are you telling me that these are the muscles of a newborn baby? Before Rinpoche could say anything, the Empress's figure suddenly flashed and looked in a certain direction. Her eyebrows were raised, and her eyes were filled with killing intent. She exerted force with her feet, and the ground immediately cracked. She exerted more force, and stones bounced up from the ground. The Empress grabbed one and threw it in a certain direction. Rinpoche felt as if he heard something exploding in the air. Then, a second stone, a third stone, even the air was torn apart, leaving cracks in its wake. "Your Majesty?" Someone was peeping just now. The Empress snorted and turned around. Rinpoche didn't need to think to know what was going on. It would be strange if no one was peeping with such a huge commotion just now. However, he couldn't be bothered with that now. Should I cut off his hair? Ren Baqian felt that it was too troublesome to untie his hair bit by bit. Many parts of his hair had already become dead knots. What? The little guy grabbed his hair tightly and wailed loudly. Ren Baqian quickly covered his ears and ran away with a face full of lingering fear. This little guy's voice was too terrifying. He even had a place in Daeyo's imperial court. This is Her Majesty's child. He is indeed Her Majesty's child. He is indeed Her Majesty's child. The winged cavalry warriors outside listened to this energetic cry and were delighted. With such a loud cry and the strange phenomenon just now, Her Majesty had a successor. After a while, Ren Baqian went in with his head down and said, "I'm not cutting your hair. Don't cry." After 2 hours of exertion, Ren Baqian's fingers were cramping, and he finally managed to untie the little fellow's hair. It was such a small thing, but its hair was 5 meters long. After untying its hair, Ren Baqian confirmed 2 things. First, this little guy was really muscular. From its neck to its heels, it was almost all bulging muscles, which gave people a terrifying visual impact. Second, Ren Baqian felt that this was even more terrifying. This little guy was a girl. Her muscles were even more terrifying than those of Qin Xuan, Tong Zhenye, and Hong Wu. However, she was a girl. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 977. I came here to apply for leave and go back to cry. I have a young girl's heart. The pretty boy from the Empress's house. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 978. The scenery in front of him changed, and Ren Baqian was back in Lan City. He heard a cheer from his side. The little fellow in the Empress's arms was looking around with glowing eyes. She stretched out her hands to Ren Baqian and said, "Wow. You finally realized that I'm quite powerful." Ren Baqian smiled and carried the little fellow over. The little fellow had already taken a bath and exuded a milky smell. Her skin was even more delicate and soft, making people want to pinch her. The little fellow was twice as big as an ordinary baby, but much heavier. Excluding her 3-meter-long hair, she weighed 17 kilograms, which was comparable to a 2-year-old child. Ren Baqian began to wonder how she could curl into a ball and stay in the Empress's belly for 3 years. The Empress's belly wasn't this big before. Wow. The little fellow waved her hands. She probably wants you to go through the time travel again, the Empress guessed. That will take 6 or 7 days. Ren Baqian laughed. The little fellow pouted and had tears in her eyes. Ren Baqian quickly covered his ears. The little fellow immediately fell into a free fall. The Empress stretched out her leg, gently lifted the little fellow, and carried her into her arms. The little fellow, who was about to explode, suddenly screamed again, "Wow!" The Empress threw her into the air and caught her with her other hand. "Wah!" Ren Baqian put down his hands and looked speechlessly at the Empress, who was playing with a ball, the little fellow who was obviously in a state of excitement, and her fluttering black hair. It seemed like it was time to decide on a name for her. Previously, he thought that if it was a boy, he would be called Chi Yuhai. Yuhai had the meaning of describing a person of great character, and this was also one of Ren Baqian's expectations. The girl would be called Chi Yuqing. When they returned to Earth, they would be called Ren Yuhai or Ren Yuqing. However, the Empress felt that the name Yuqing was too weak. Ren Baqian didn't feel that this name was weak. Looking at the little fellow's bulging muscles, Ren Baqian hoped that she would be weak in the future. Your Majesty? In addition to Ren Baqian and the little fellow, there were 2 other people in the room who were stunned and looking at the little fellow being thrown around by the Empress. Qing Yuan and Hong Wan looked in front of them in shock. When they left, there were 2, and when they returned, there were 3. His expression gradually turned into one of joy. "Pass down my order. Set up a banquet tonight," the Empress instructed as she tossed the little fellow in the air. "Inform everyone that Her Majesty has given birth to a daughter." Ren Baqian said. "Congratulations, Your Majesty." "Congratulations, Zhao Prince Consort." The two of them couldn't hide their joy. "We'll inform the other lords right away. Do you have any other instructions?" "No more." A few minutes after the two of them left, they heard cheers coming from outside. Rinpoche asked, "Little fellow, what do you want to eat? Is your majesty breastfeeding?" The empress's outstretched hand immediately froze. She watched as the little fellow slid down from her fingers. Soon after, she quickly stretched out her leg and picked her up. Somewhat annoyed, she said, "No milk. I didn't find a nanny." Rinpoche sighed. "I think she should eat meat." The empress carried the little fellow in front of her and looked at her from left to right. She then opened her mouth to take a look and said, "You have grown 8 teeth and can eat meat now. She was just born and drank a bucket of water just now. Her stomach may not be able to digest meat. Milk her first." Rinpoche objected. After that, he quickly walked out of the hall and shouted, "Someone, go outside the city and bring back 2 cows that are in milk." Then, the empress played with the little fellow while Rinpoche kept walking in circles in the hall, trying to figure out what was missing. For example, diapers? For example, milk bottles? For example, a nanny? At the thought of this, Rinpoche suddenly remembered something and took it. Before he could say anything, the empress said impatiently, "You are making me dizzy." Rinpoche turned his head and said, "We still need to find someone to take care of the little fellow. She's too strong, and Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan are too weak." At present, it seemed that the newly born little fellow was at least at the intermediate level of the earth wheel level, which was similar to Rinpoche's. However, with the momentum of the little fellow's birth, the empress didn't have any abnormalities after she was born. It was only after her cultivation that she began to advance at a rapid pace. Rinpoche felt that if he didn't work harder, he wouldn't even be able to defeat his own daughter. Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan were only at the man-wheel level and were the most ordinary aboriginals. For them to take care of the little fellow was no different from sending them to the battlefield. The chances of survival on the battlefield would be higher. At least, they wouldn't have to face an earth-wheel-level enemy every day. One had to know that the destructive power of a child was terrifying, and an earth-wheel-level child was close to the level of a nuclear bomb. At this moment, the parents of the 2 newborns were in 2 completely different situations. One of them found a new toy and was smiling. On the other hand, the other person fell into a state of anxiety as if he was afraid that something would go wrong after thinking about it. Shi Qin was drinking tea in the courtyard when he heard someone report that the empress had given birth. The most precious jade pot in his hand fell to the ground, and he hurriedly walked out of the courtyard to enter the palace. After thinking for a while, he opened the treasury and began to rummage through it. Chikohai was holding a blade of grass to his nose. This blade of grass was already withered and looked unremarkable, but it was brought to him by someone from the 60,000 mountains. Smelling this grass, it was as if he could smell the scent of his hometown. When he heard the news, Chikohai stood there for a long time before sighing softly. In any case, it's good news. Tu Wan was beating up her husband, who was a minister of the Sifeng department. When she heard the news, she didn't kick him, and her face was filled with ecstasy. She then snorted at her husband, who was about to fight her, and said, "You got lucky this time. Pack up and prepare to enter the palace with me to congratulate Her Majesty." Congratulating Her Majesty is an important matter, so I'll let you off today. Don't think that I'm afraid of you." The other burly man withdrew his fists and snorted. If it weren't for his panda eyes, some people might have believed his words. Qin Chuan was waving 2 iron locks with a diameter of 2 meters. The original stone locks had been replaced with bullets, and when he heard the news, he immediately threw the iron locks to the side. The entire Ministry of War was shocked. He was ecstatic at first, but after laughing for a while, he seemed to have thought of something and became depressed again. He put his hands behind his back and looked to the south. There was someone's grave there. Tong Jinye was doing the same thing as him. He stroked his beard and had a faint smile on his face. It was as if this smile had never appeared on his face before. Now that Her Majesty has a descendant, there's no need to worry. After a few years, I might be able to see you earlier. Hua Hua, Zhui Yen, Xiong Yaohe, Feng Ho, Gu Hong, white stone eagle, Tai. Subsequently, the news spread among the people and the entire Lan city was in an uproar. Someone, bring out the set for the new year. This is a joyous occasion, a joyous occasion. In one day, the entire Lan city turned from sunny to ghostly. White bones and skeletons were hung everywhere, and a small red flower was wrapped around them. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 979. At the banquet that night, the hall was bustling with noise even before the Empress arrived. The descendant of Her Majesty is naturally talented. In the future, our Aboriginals will have another exceptional expert. Not to mention inheriting all of Her Majesty's talents, even half of them will make him an exceptional expert. It's really strange that he actually stayed in Her Majesty's womb for 3 years. I've never heard of a child born in 3 years. Doesn't this mean that he's different from the rest? Today is really a joyous day. Her Majesty has a child, and I can finally rest assured. Even outside the hall, one could hear the hustle and bustle inside. Her Majesty has arrived. Zhao Prince Consort has arrived. Following the announcement of the guard at the door, everyone in the hall shut their mouths and looked toward the door. There were 2 doors at the front and back of the hall. Entry was through the main door, and those who left early would leave through the back door. The Empress, dressed in red, strode into the hall with her long hair fluttering in the wind. She was carrying a drowsy baby in her arms. The baby was slightly bigger than a newborn. What surprised everyone the most was that the baby actually had long hair on its back. The hair was braided into a whip and coiled around the Empress's bosom. A portion of the hair covered her body like a cup. Ren Baqian, who was beside the Empress, was half a step slower. Everyone was used to this scene. At this moment, everyone's attention was focused on the baby in the Empress's arms. As the Empress entered the hall, everyone was delighted. They were relieved that the Empress had given birth. However, their expressions and gazes quickly changed. Their eyes widened, and they couldn't close their mouths. Kismet heaven? Someone exclaimed. Even more people had their mouths wide open, their faces filled with disbelief. It was actually Kismet heaven. Kismet heaven as soon as he was born. How was this possible? Was the child that Her Majesty was carrying in her arms that was born today? One had to know that Tong Lan was extremely talented, and Tong Jinye had high hopes for her. She had also reached Kismet heaven at the age of 7. This speed was already amazing, and it was rare even among the Aboriginals. They had never heard of anyone being born at Kismet heaven. Rinpoche looked at everyone's expressions and felt quite pleased. After all, this was his child. It was just like how parents like to show off their children on their WeChat moments. At most, they would show off what the child had learned, such as painting, foreign languages, playing the piano, or martial arts. But it was useless. My daughter scared you to death the moment she was born. Rinpoche coughed softly as he sat beside the Empress. An uproar erupted in the surroundings. Kismet heaven? How is that possible? He's already a Kismet heaven at birth? Unheard of. This kid is so terrifying. I've never heard of such talent before. Unprecedented throughout the ages, #1 under the heavens. Rinpoche's eyes narrowed as he listened to everyone exploding. He turned his head to look at the little fellow. At this time, she was already completely asleep. The noise in the main hall did not affect her at all. Her snot bubbles were coming out one after another as if she was smeared with soap. Not bad, he was his biological son and had inherited his powerful genes. The Empress chuckled as she sat there. It was rare to see such an Empress. At the banquet that followed, everyone was less interested in eating. Instead, they focused all their attention on the baby in the Empress's arms. It was too shocking. Everyone was at a loss for words and couldn't find anything to say. Until the end of the banquet, when the Empress and Rinpoche left with the child, everyone was still sitting in the main hall and discussing for a long time. Everyone was ecstatic. Everyone was excited that the Empress had such a descendant. It was as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Shi Qing's face was beaming, And Ko Zhihai didn't look reluctant at all. He laughed until he couldn't open his eyes for the entire night. That night, this shocking news spread to all the residences. It caused another uproar. Everyone regarded this child as the strongest aboriginal expert in the future, or even the #1 expert since ancient times. Even Li Fu, Qingyun's sword, and the others had heard about it. The next day, Li Fu asked to see the empress for the first time. This was the first time he had taken the initiative to come to the palace after coming to Lan City. His purpose was to take a look at this child. Allow him to take a look. The empress waved her hand. The uproar of everyone made her feel very excited. There wasn't a parent who didn't want their offspring to be a world-shaking expert. In particular, this child showed exceptional talent at birth. Wow! The little fellow was stumbling in the main hall as she chased after the golden retriever, which was Ting Ling. The little monkey from back then had grown a lot and was half the height of a human when it stood up. It had enjoyed a few years of bliss in the palace. However, everything came to an abrupt end today. In order to tease his newborn daughter, Rinpochian carried Ting Ling over. At first, it happily squatted on Rinpochian's shoulder. However, as soon as the little fellow saw Ting Ling, it crawled over with glowing eyes and opened its arms. Wow! Rinpochian touched Ting Ling's head and placed it in front of the little fellow. The little fellow reached out and grabbed a handful of hair, scaring Ting Ling into running away as if it had seen a ghost. Stay in the main hall and don't go out. Rinpochian casually said this and pushed it straight into the fire pit. Although the little fellow stumbled as she walked, she was strong and could climb very fast even when she was crawling. She was able to run 7 to 8 meters away in no time, chasing after the Ting Ling until there was no way out. This was the scene that Li Fu saw when he came in. After taking a closer look at the little fellow, Li Fu was also shocked. Was she really born yesterday? Nonsense. Rinpochian rolled his eyes. Li Fu took a deep breath and said, "It's actually true. It's actually true." After a while, Li Fu suppressed the shock on his face and cupped his hands at the two of them. With such amazing talent, this child should be the backbone of the human race. You are as timid as a dog, yet you expect a child to be the backbone of the human race? How can you have the nerve to say that? The backbone of the human race should be able to stand tall and face life and death. That is the backbone of the human race. No matter how talented this child is, she's just one person. She doesn't deserve this. Rinpochian stood there and scolded. Li Fu's face turned pale from the scolding. After a while, he sighed and said, "I heard that Su Wuming died in your hands, right? What a pity. Stop changing the subject." Rinpochian scolded again. "If you continue, I won't have the face to stay here any longer." Li Fu covered his face with one hand. "You're right. The human race should stand tall and be the backbone of the human race. You don't deserve the title of the world's most powerful expert. If the two of you don't mind, let me teach her some tricks. I might be able to help her in the future." Rinpochian's expression softened a little. This old fellow was as timid as a dead dog all the time, but he finally had some face today. However, his daughter, she was already begging to be taught by the world's most powerful expert at birth. She was a proper protagonist. In the following days, not only was Lan City shaken, but even the Yun nation was shaken. Hong Wu immediately returned from the protectorate of the north. Zi Donglai, Li Qianqiu, and the others, Shi Wanya, Zhuoyu, and the others also sent their subordinates back to Lan City with valuable gifts. Nowadays, there were a few Yun nation families in Lan City that did business all year round. They were smart people and were the first group of merchants to go to Lan City after the Yun nation was destroyed. They also sold their goods at low prices. They could be considered to be insightful. In the past few years, not only did they build a relationship with the Zhang family, but they also established a foothold in Lan City. The news that the Empress had a child who was an earthwheel expert at birth shook Lan City and Dayo. Naturally, this news was also spread back to the Yun nation through their caravans. The world was shaken. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 980. The Empress closed her eyes and flipped through the dictionary. She twirled her finger in the air and then pointed it downwards. That's it. Renba Qian. The Empress's finger just so happened to touch a do. Chijilu? What kind of name was that? The Empress opened her eyes and looked at the position that her finger was pointing at. She recited it in her heart twice, and her face immediately turned cloudy. It doesn't count, let's do it again. The Empress closed the dictionary without hesitation, and a hole appeared on the table. Renba Qian skillfully took out a dictionary from beside him. Behind him were 2 stacks of dictionaries that were 1 meter tall. Previously, they were 2 meters tall. Li, again. This one is not bad. She's not even as good as Chi Yuqing. Renba Qian curled his lips. Again. Great. You might as well add a word. Great sage, heaven's equal, this domineering person. I wonder if he'll cause trouble for you. I don't think he dares. After a short while, Renba Qian stretched out his hand and touched empty air. He turned his head and saw that there was only 1 dictionary left. Your Majesty, this is the last chance. It seems like we can only choose from the front. Renba Qian was still trying his best. How about Chi Yuqing? No. The Empress was obviously very anxious. Never. No matter what it is this time, this is it, the Empress said fiercely. On the other hand, the little fellow was still rolling around on the ground. She had accidentally broken 7 or 8 pieces of the flagstone on the ground. The little fellow was overjoyed. He did not know that his future was pinned on the last time his parents closed their eyes and flipped through the dictionary. Air. Upon seeing this word, Renba Qian's expression changed. He turned to look at the little fellow with a face full of grief. Flower. After hearing the last word, Renba Qian fell silent. Renba Qian looked up at the Empress, whose face had turned from cloudy to stormy. He rubbed his forehead and said, Your Majesty, your daughter is called Qi Erhua. The Empress, this name is actually not bad. It's simple and easy to raise. Renba Qian tried to find a good point about this name. Where I come from, it's popular. For example, Guden, Yaden, Ergu, and so on. Erhua sounds better than Ergo. If I call him Chi Ergu, hee. Renba Qian laughed at this point. Bang. The Empress sent him flying with a kick. Her face alternated between green and white as she sat there. Forget it, let's just call her Chi Yuqing. Your Majesty, a monarch never goes back on his words. I know, I will not change it. He used to be called 2 Flowers. Bang. The Empress gritted her teeth and said, Someone, add the princess's name to the list. Chi Yuqing. The Empress turned her head and looked at the heartless little fellow rolling on the ground. She became even more depressed and gave her a tight slap on her butt. He didn't hide his anger at all. Wow! The little fellow turned to look at the Empress with a blank look on his face. He didn't know what was going on. As she thought about it, her eyes began to fill with tears. Wow! Master, I heard that Qi Zixiao's daughter was born a cardinal heaven expert, which is equivalent to our earth wheel expert. Do you think this is true? On the way to Lan City from the Yun Nation, a few carriages were traveling at high speed. A conversation was taking place in one of the carriages. It should be true. Qi Zixiao wouldn't lie about such a thing, the old man said. If Renba Qian was here, he would have recognized them. The old man was the new chief of the Temple of Heaven, Zhongshang, and the young man was Jiao Ping, who had been guarding him for a few days. After half a year, the Temple of Heaven had finally settled down, and Zhongshang set off for Lan City. She was born an earth wheel expert. It's unimaginable and terrifying. Jiao Ping shook his head and sighed. Compared to the other party, his talent was nothing. It's indeed terrifying. Zhongshang nodded. However, it's also a blessing. It's a blessing for the human race to have such a talented person in the future. Jiao Ping nodded. It was indeed a blessing for the human race to have such an expert when they left the land of exile in the future. I don't know what level she will reach in the end and whether she can compare to the ancient emperor. It's said that even when the emperor was born, he wasn't this terrifying. It's hard to say. The birth of the emperor always causes strange phenomena, but this child has no strange phenomena and was born a Kismet heaven expert. I don't understand. Is this also considered a strange phenomenon? Maybe it's true. Zhong Shang nodded again. The two of them ended the topic. After a while, Jiaoping said, I've heard of Dayo's official road before, but now I know how amazing it is. The entire road is extremely wide and has no gaps. It is said to be built with something called cement. It took less than 100,000 people 3 years to complete this path. His words were full of amazement. One had to know that it would take 100,000 laborers to build more than 500 kilometers. Even an ordinary stone road that was 3 meters wide would take 10 years to build. This road was at least 12 meters wide, but it only took 3 years to build. The road was wide and much smoother. Visitors from the outer realm shouldn't be much to him, right? As Zhong Shang spoke, he pulled open the curtain and looked outside with anticipation in his eyes. He hoped that the future of the human race would be like this. After a week, Rinpochen and the Empress calmed down from the joy of becoming parents for the first time. Although the little fellow was tyrannical and talented, it was still relatively easy to play with. Anything interesting could keep her entertained for half a day. As for eating, the Empress was right. The little fellow actually only ate meat. Furthermore, her eyes lit up when she saw the Empress drinking. She would clap her hands and cheer. This gave Rinpochen a bad premonition. He was afraid that the little fellow would grow up to be a wine barrel. Afterward, the Empress dipped her chopsticks in white wine and fed her half a bowl. Rinpochen felt that this prediction had become a reality. At this time, the little fellow was wearing a red tutu and dragging 2 whips that were more than 2 meters long behind her head. She was chasing the roaring emperor on the ground. The roaring emperor was only at the man-wheel level and didn't dare to dig a hole in the hull. At this time, it was forced into a corner by the little fellow and looked flustered. Rinpochen went forward to lift the little fellow and smiled gently. Little fellow, it's time to see Grandpa and Grandma. Although his smile was gentle, he was unsure. He didn't know what the pair of devils at home would think when they saw their granddaughter, who was only half a month old and could already run, jump, climb up the roof, catch chickens, and chase dogs. Her muscles were bulging like a bodybuilder, and her body seemed a little disproportionate to her head. It was as if her body was 1 size bigger, and she could smash a wall with 1 punch. However, an ugly daughter-in-law had to meet her parents-in-law sooner or later. Rinpochen's daughter had to meet the elders. Woo? The little fellow was puzzled after being picked up, but she quickly became cheerful. Her face was beaming with a smile that was as clear as a gem. Your Majesty, let's go. Rinpochen pulled the Empress, and the 3 of them disappeared from the palace. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 981. Wow! The little fellow had just arrived on Earth. After seeing that everything around her was completely different, she let out a joyful cheer and patted Rinpochen's shoulders with her 2 little palms. Bang! Bang! Rinpochen grinned. If it weren't for his strong body, he would have been sent to the emergency room. Have you found someone to take care of her? Rinpochen asked. Although the little fellow didn't need to be taken care of like an ordinary baby, she needed someone to play with her at all times. No matter what time she woke up, whether it was midnight, 2 a.m., or 8 a.m., she needed someone to play with her at all times. Otherwise, she would roar like a lion. The Empress rubbed her eyebrows. It wasn't that easy to find someone. To be able to control the little fellow, one had to be at least at the peak of Kismet heaven. Considering the growth of the little fellow, it was best to have the strength of a Cardinal Heaven expert. Cardinal Heaven experts were also considered the top fighters in Dayo. Most of the experts at the peak of Kismet heaven had duties, let alone Cardinal Heaven experts. Rinpochen couldn't possibly ask them to throw their duties aside to look after the child, could he? Otherwise, call Exanja back to atone for her crimes. Rinpochen looked at her expression and knew that it wasn't settled yet. The Empress glanced at him and said, "You are especially concerned about her. After all, she was dismissed and punished because of me. Besides, it's convenient for you to use her. She has arranged the palace guards in an orderly manner for so many years. Ren Baqian's mouth twitched, and he almost sneered at the Empress. I was the one who said 3 years. The Empress frowned and obviously didn't want to change her mind. TSK, how fragrant. Ren Baqian clicked his tongue. Boom. The Empress carried the little fellow with one hand and put the other behind her back. Her expression kept changing as she stood there. After a while, she gave up on the idea of calling Exanja back and decided to see if Shiwanya could find a suitable person. After all, there were many experts in the 60,000 mountains. Although they were fierce and unrestrained, Shiwanya had taken a few years to bring 30% of the villages under his control. Perhaps he could find a suitable candidate. Ren Baqian climbed out from a pile of bricks, changed his clothes, sat in the living room, and pressed a button. A holographic image immediately appeared in front of him. Boss? You're back. In the picture was a woman wrapped in a bath towel. Don't look at her face. That's right, she was Xinfeng's assistant. Although she was a woman, she looked more manly than a man. Sometimes, Ren Baqian wondered why his assistant was so different from other people's assistants. Sure enough, everything in the movies was fake. Are the 2 demon kings in my family here? Ren Baqian asked lightly. I've been here for 10 days. I'm currently staying in the villa area. Ren Baqian told them that he would be back in half a month. He didn't expect them to rush over after a few days because they couldn't stay at home. Oh, got it. What about 10,000 years? He's currently in Wuji City and seems to be cooperating with the Armed Forces United Command. Has anything happened recently? The experts from the military have fought with the US 3 times in Africana and lost more than 10 people. Ren Baqian listened quietly. The conflict between the rising number 1 country and the former number 1 country that was unwilling to give up its position had never lessened. In other words, the 2 sides were using various conflicts to test each other's strength and confidence in various aspects. After all, the 2 countries couldn't go to war with each other with real swords and guns. After the US demonstrated the exoskeleton equipment and successfully swayed some of the opportunists, the military sent people to Africana. They didn't expect the conflict to take so long. According to the narration, the 3 skirmishes involved dozens to hundreds of people. The military lost more than 10 man-will experts, while the other side only lost more than 10 people. The number of casualties on both sides was equal. After the outbreak of these 3 skirmishes, the opportunists immediately stood firmly by the other side, waving flags and shouting war cries. The various political and economic visits they had conducted had already explained everything. The difficulty of cultivating a man-will expert and manufacturing an exoskeleton were completely different. It could be said that an ordinary person, who had practiced martial arts, could use an exoskeleton after a short period of training. However, for an ordinary person to reach the man-will level, not only did it require time, resources, and talent. Under such circumstances, it was easy to understand why the opportunists made such a choice. Ren Baqian sneered. Those people had never seen an earth-will expert and didn't know how huge the gap between a man-will and an earth-will expert was. One had to know that an earth-will expert could already cut bullets with a knife. This wasn't something that the soldiers who used the exoskeleton system and the assistance of artificial intelligence could contend against. On the big stage, technology did indeed have an advantage. However, under the current situation where it was impossible to use weapons of mass destruction, an earth-will expert had a crushing advantage. Has anyone in the military reached the earth-will level? Ren Baqian asked faintly. The other party was silent for a while before replying. 3 from the military and 2 from the Armed Forces Command. Ren Baqian nodded. With such a large population base in the past 10 years, there would definitely be a few geniuses emerging. However, since the military had an earth-will expert, it meant that the number of earth-will experts wouldn't be small in the future. He needed to increase the number of winged cavalry warriors on Earth. In addition, he also needed to arrange for a cardinal heaven expert. This level of expert could be used as a nuclear deterrent. After understanding what he wanted to know, Ren Baqian turned off the holographic image. The Empress had changed into a long red dress and was carrying the little fellow, who was wearing a red doo-doo, downstairs. The little fellow was like a small animal that was being held by the neck. It was very quiet, but its black eyes kept rolling. "Let's go, the ugly daughter-in-law is going to see her in-laws." Just as Rinpoche finished speaking, the Empress kicked him out. "Ugly daughter-in-law? Ugly granddaughter." Rinpoche sighed. The Empress raised her eyebrows. "That pair of eyes looks like you." "Yes, yes," Rinpoche replied unhurriedly. The little fellow was actually quite good-looking, but her single eyelids made her eyes look a little small. It looked like Rinpoche. But then again, the Empress's phoenix eyes weren't considered big. The corners of her eyes were raised at a moderate angle, higher than the corners of her eyes, and the inner corners of her eyes were facing down. There was a unique charm to her eyes. Her eyes were spirited and quite dignified. They complemented the Empress's heroic spirit and complemented each other. They were completely different from those almond eyes and peach blossom eyes that gave people an affinity. After exchanging a few words with the Empress, the three of them took the elevator downstairs and took a car to the villa area. In fact, it wasn't too far away, but the little fellow's muscles and hair that was more than 2 meters long were a little shocking. Rinpoche wasn't prepared to go out and be surrounded by people. When they arrived at the villa area, Rinpoche had just stepped onto the steps when the door was opened. All the houses in the villa area had 360-degree AI surveillance. As long as there were guests, the AI butler would alert them before they reached the door. "Why did you take so long to come back?" As soon as he opened the door, Rinpoche's father grumbled while looking around for his granddaughter. "This is..." Before Rinpoche's father could finish his sentence, his eyes froze. "Wow!" The little fellow clapped her hands and laughed. "I told you that I would be back in half a month." Rinpoche smiled helplessly. He knew that his father would react this way when he saw his father's expression. "Is it the one you mentioned?" Rinpoche's father asked with his eyes wide open. "That's right, my daughter, your granddaughter," Rinpoche replied. "Really? Why would I lie to you? She's my biological daughter. Your granddaughter is still warm." Rinpoche's father glanced at the Empress, waved his hands, and put on a smile. "I don't mean anything else. I just feel that this child is a little big and has such hair. She was born with a lot of hair. These muscles. She has been practicing martial arts since she was in her mother's womb." Rinpoche's father finally couldn't continue talking to Rinpoche. He rolled his eyes and suppressed his anger. He smiled at the Empress and said, "Come in and talk. Why are our own family members standing at the door?" "Isn't it because you are blocking the door? I thought you changed your profession to be a door god," Rinpoche ridiculed. Rinpoche's father was so angry that he wanted to give him a kick. Chapter 982. Rinpoche placed the little fellow on the ground. "Your two granddaughters." Rinpoche and the Empress sat on the sofa while the little fellow sat on the ground and looked around. Everything around her was new to her. Sitting on the opposite sofa was the Demon King X2, who was staring at the little fellow motionlessly. The two of them were sizing up the little fellow, who was wearing a red doo-doo and had her hair coiled into a big circle on the ground. Only the ends of her hair were in the hands of the Empress. "It seems a little big?" Mama Rin asked doubtfully. "Good nutrition." "Why is her hair so long?" Mama Rin asked the same question as Papa Rin. "She was born with a lot of hair," Rinpoche said helplessly. The two of them looked at the little fellow, then at Rinpoche and the Empress. After a long time, they didn't dare to ask if she was their biological daughter. "It's probably related to the special condition of Zixiao's body," Rinpoche said. The two of them were puzzled as they didn't know what was so special about her body. Zixiao is a spirit wheel expert. What's a spirit wheel expert? The two of them were even more puzzled. In fact, the highest level on Earth was the Earth Wheel, and many ordinary people hadn't even heard of it. As for the two elders, even though they knew about man and Earth Wheel experts, that was all they knew. As the name suggests, she is an expert above the Earth Wheel level. It's probably the difference between level 1 and level 30. SSS. The two of them gasped as if they had convulsions. Even though they were ignorant, they knew the level of an earthwheel expert on Earth. They were the top experts and could be said to be the pillars of the country. According to their son, this was only level 1. How could their daughter-in-law be more than 10 times stronger than an earthwheel expert? Don't tell others about this. In fact, not many people know about the existence of a spirit wheel expert, Rinpoche said faintly. He turned to look at the Empress and subconsciously wanted her to perform. A simple performance of breaking a wall with a flick of her fingers would probably scare the two elders into thinking that she was a god. However, the Empress acted as if she didn't see it. Rinpoche's parents looked at the Empress, then at their son, and then at their granddaughter. Although they still couldn't figure out why the little fellow was born like this, at least there was an explanation. The two of them thought about it and decided that they couldn't ask too much. Their son didn't have many secrets, and their daughter-in-law had even more. The two of them smiled and asked, "What is the child's name?" "Rin Yuqing." "How do I write it?" "I'll follow your U as in beautiful jade, Qing as in alluring city." Papa Rin glared at him and said, "Nonsense, do you think I don't know that you have the same name as me? The name is not bad. Do you have a nickname?" "Two flowers." The Empress glared at Rinpoche. "Papa Rin, Mama Rin, although we can call him by his nickname, isn't this too casual?" Papa Rin was a little hesitant. On the other hand, Mama Rin put on a smile and said, Hua, come, let Grandma give you a hug." "Don't hug her." Rinpoche saw that one of the demon kings was going to hug the little fellow and quickly stopped him. "Why can't I hug my granddaughter?" The little fellow was born with the strength of an earthwheel expert. "She doesn't know what to do yet," Rinpoche explained. Papa Ren and Mama Ren were dumbfounded. An earthwheel expert at birth? Sometimes, they would listen to Wan Yen talk about some things. They knew that the strongest experts were at the earthwheel level, and there were only a few of them on Earth. Now, not only did they have a daughter-in-law who was at the spirit wheel level, but even their granddaughter was at the earthwheel level. Since when did the Earth become so magical? Wah 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 wah. The little fellow muttered a few words, then cheered and slammed her palms on the ground. The entire ground shook. With the little fellow at the center, a large area of the floor tiles cracked. Even the cement below her body was overturned. Papa Rin, Mama Rin, Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. This time, he didn't have to explain. Papa Ren and Mama Ren were really dumbfounded. If the two of them didn't have an intuitive understanding of an earthwheel expert just now, they were really shocked after seeing this scene. One had to know that the little fellow slammed her palms on the ground playfully, but it actually caused so much damage. There was cement below the ground. If this were to hit a person, after a long time, Papa Ren smiled bitterly and said, "This granddaughter isn't an ordinary person." Mama Ren rolled her eyes at him. Was there a need for him to say anything? The two of them didn't know what to say about the little fellow's situation. There weren't many elderly people who didn't want to have a grandchild, but with Hua's situation, there was no hope for that. The only thing that comforted them was that this little fellow was extraordinary. In the future, there would be an heir to the Ren family's foundation. Afterward, they put this matter aside and chatted with Rinpoche and the Empress. After all, these two people were rarely seen, especially their daughters-in-law. Not long after, there was no place left intact on the ground. The solid wood table at the side was also broken. The television was also broken. Half of the wall had collapsed, and the door frame had collapsed. The little fellow still wanted to reach for the electric wire, but Rinpoche quickly pulled it back. At this time, Papa Ren and Mama Ren could only smile bitterly. Not long after, Ren Wanyin also came back. He pushed the door open and saw the situation in the room. What's going on? Was it robbed? I've never heard of houses being demolished after being robbed. Big brother, sister-in-law, your niece did it. Papa Ren smiled bitterly. Niece? By the way, where's my niece? Then he saw Ren Yuqing smashing a piece of cement on the ground with her palm. The little fellow held the overturned cement in her hands, clapped her hands, and immediately turned it into powder. The little fellow was so excited that she couldn't stop crying. This time, It was Ren Wanyan who was gasping in shock. After listening to the entire situation, he could only exclaim, "She was born an earth wheel expert. She's going to become an immortal." What would the 5 experts who worked so hard to reach the earth wheel level think? I originally thought that my son was already pretty good. There's no way to compare, no way to compare. Although he was exclaiming that there was no way to compare, Ren Wanyan didn't feel envious. There was no point in being envious of such a child. Only his elder brother and that mysterious sister-in-law could have such a demon-like descendant. Everyone had dinner in this dilapidated house. Since the house was going to be destroyed anyway, they might as well let the little fellow run around. After dinner, Rinpochian and Ren Wanyan went to the study to have a chat. Today, New Century was already one of the top technology companies in the world and was ranked among the top 3 companies in the world. Although the basic technology was still in the hands of the nation, Ren Wanyan hadn't been idle all these years. He had also developed some of his own technology. Furthermore, he had investments in many technology companies. There were a few that Rinpochian valued the most. One of them was an aerospace company. The company that Ren Wanyan had invested in had sent people to the moon more than 10 times. Currently, they were carrying out a private mission to and from Mars. In fact, a few major countries had already achieved this. Another was robots. Ren Wanyan had invested in 2 relatively large robot companies, which were currently a hot topic. Another was artificial intelligence. With the popularization of 6G, there were countless companies researching artificial intelligence. Some of them even had simple intelligence. For example, the United States exoskeleton equipment used artificial intelligence to help ordinary people achieve a 1-to-1 casualty ratio with the help of an exoskeleton to a man-wheel expert. The combination of robots and artificial intelligence had already caused an impact on the current society in all aspects. For example, there were fewer and fewer jobs such as cashiers and inventory clerks in society. Other jobs such as translators, doctors, and teachers were also impacted. For example, drivers and porters had been eliminated for nearly a decade. Fortunately, the nation had improved welfare in time. Coupled with the virtual world, some people invested in the virtual world, which reduced social instability. Of course, the disadvantage was that the birth rate was extremely low. This wasn't only the case in China, but also in the entire world. Now, many experts had proposed to artificially breed babies and raise them together or be adopted to improve the current fertility situation. However, compared to this, many people were more concerned about the immortality project. The immortality project was actually divided into 2 types. One was to extend life and reverse aging. This technology had been buzzing for decades, and there had been some real progress today. The other type was to store people's thoughts in the internet. This was also one of the reasons why New Century Company was so popular. The thought control system allowed them to see a glimmer of possibility. Ren Wanyan had also invested in research in this area. In addition, there were materials and energy fields, as well as medical fields. Rinpochian had a need for many of them. The huge market share, profits, and prospects of New Century Company allowed Ren Wanyan to spend money on some frontier fields without considering short-term returns. What Rinpochian wanted was their future. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 983. Palace Master, are we going to the Imperial Palace directly? Let's find a place to settle down and walk around, Zhong Shang said lightly. He was very interested in some of the current changes in Lan City. After passing through the road from the Yun Nation to Lan City, his interest had intensified and could even be said to be urgent. Previously, he could only read about it from the dossiers, but now he could finally see it with his own eyes. After entering the city, Zhong Shang looked at the electric poles on the roadside from time to time. It was said that these things made Lan City brightly lit. Nowadays, many people in Great Xia had heard of Lan City's reputation as a sleepless city. However, it was hard for the people of Great Xia to imagine that such a name would appear in a place like Dayo, which was like a barren land. Some people even speculated that Dayo had stolen a huge amount of kerosene from the Yun nation and lit it up in the city overnight. It was a very foolish guess, but outsiders would never be able to imagine what an electric lamp looked like. It was even difficult for them to understand. On the other hand, the Temple of Heaven's dossier said, "Place thunder and lightning in a crystal ball, and the night will be bright." After settling down, Zhongshang led a few people to walk on the streets of Lan City. I haven't seen many people fighting fiercely along the way. It's a little different from the rumors. It is said that Lan City has built 8 arenas. Any disputes will be settled in the arenas. Otherwise, there will be heavy penalties, Jiao Pingsui said. Zhongshang nodded slightly. This was a good idea. Not only did this maintain the aggressive nature of the Aboriginals, but it also reduced disputes among the people. Only a nation like Dayo, where strength was respected and the imperial court was filled with top-notch experts, could use this method. It was impossible for other nations to do so. What is this place? Why does it smell so bad? It should be Jinghua. Jiao Ping guessed. The well was a place to relieve oneself. It was usually a building that was slightly taller than an ordinary building, and one could go up the stairs from the outside. Below it was a bucket filled with filth. Oh! Zhongshang took a quick look at it. It was different from the common well spiders in Great Xia. It was much bigger, and there were no external stairs or doors. People could only enter from the side. Normally, only one person could enter a well, but this one had many people entering, so it looked even messy. After all, with his status, there was no way he would pay attention to this kind of thing. Then, Zhongshang went straight to Jingyang Street, which was his destination. Whenever he saw a shop with a sign of the royal family hanging on it, he would go in and take a look. After walking around, he saw quite a few rare items, especially the royal department store. The table clock, toothpaste, wheat, vermicelli, soy sauce, and underwear were things he had never seen before. He especially liked the table clock and sugar, so he specially bought some. Following which, Rinpochen went to the glass shop, the condiment shop, and even the pastry shop and the bookstore to gain some understanding of the new products that had appeared in Dayo. At present, it seemed that they were mainly focused on the livelihood of the people. However, this was also normal. The truly important things would not appear here. However, he did buy a lot of books in the bookstore. He was very interested in these things. As for the pastry shop, it had just been opened for a month. Every day, there was a tempting aroma coming from it. There were not many types of pastries, only a few types of pastries and a few types of sugar. However, the taste was excellent, and there was even freshly squeezed fruit juice. Although the price was not low, it was sold out every day after it was released. Tong Lan was a regular customer here. She spent more than half of her monthly salary here, which made her rather resentful. Zhongshang wandered in Lan City until it was dark and was finally satisfied. Lan City had indeed changed. Along the way, he saw some non-Aboriginals walking the same way as the Aboriginals. Both sides turned a blind eye to each other, and the situation was much better than what he had heard before. It seemed that the people of Lan City were also changing. He only saw it after the street lights were turned on at night. If the literati of Great Xia were here, they might have left behind 2 poems that would be passed down through the ages. It would have been even better if there were no white skeletons with little red flowers hanging everywhere that teased his nerves from time to time. In particular, when the night wind blew, it was really chilly and ghostly wails and wolf howls. The next day, Zhongshang requested to see the Empress and Rinpochen. The Empress did not give him a good look. In fact, it was already a form of tolerance that she did not make a move on the spot, and Zhongshang would not have any opinion on this. However, Zhongshang's main purpose was to see Rinpochen. In addition, he also wanted to see the child who had caused an uproar. Rinpochen did not care about this. It could be said that Qi Yuqing had an extremely high status in the hearts of these experts. In the future, when she walked out of the land of exile, this child would probably be the top fighting force of the human race. After seeing the little fellow, Zhongshang looked at Rinpochen and asked, "Can I see her condition? The muscles on her body seem a little unnatural." Rinpochen nodded. In fact, he also knew what was going on with Qi Yuqing's muscles. Back then, she absorbed too much essence blood from the Empress's body, and the power was too great for her. As a result, she was born with muscles. As she gradually grew up, the energy stored in her body would gradually be absorbed, and she would return to her normal body size. However, it was hard to say whether she could develop a body of muscles again. Zhongshang's conclusion after seeing her was the same as what Rinpoche had learned before. As for the speed of recovery, it was difficult to calculate. This was because it still depended on her martial arts talent and the speed at which she transformed essence blood. In the past, there were cases of spirit wheel experts giving birth to children. Although the descendants of spirit wheel experts were usually more talented, there had never been a situation like Chiyuqing's. As a result, no one dared to easily measure it. However, Rinpoche did not care. Even if she grew up to be a body of muscles, with her status, there was no need to worry about not being able to get married. After that, Zhongshang stayed in Lan City for half a month and saw the steam train. He was greatly impressed by this tool. If the human race wanted to get out of the 60,000 mountains, it wouldn't be possible with just a few people. They would need a large number of experts, a strong army, a large number of supplies, and a steady stream of follow-up forces. It would also be difficult for so many people to cross the 60,000 mountains. Back then, the average strength of the last 100,000 people was much stronger than it was now. There were almost no old or weak people among them. However, only half of the 100,000 people were left. Previously, when he heard Rinpoche say that there was a tool to fly in the sky, he also thought about it. However, after seeing the train, he immediately realized that this tool could send the human race across the 60,000 mountains. Of course, enough tracks had to be laid. However, as long as there were enough materials and manpower, this could be achieved. A few days later, the first batch of tractors would be sold, and Zhongshang would be able to see this new steel monster with his own eyes. After 4 months, Rinpoche finally saved up 200 tractors, which was already the full production capacity. However, the experts had made adjustments to the production line, and the craftsmen were more familiar with it. In the future, the production speed should be much faster. Previously, most of the people in Lan City had heard of this kind of metal monster that could walk on its own. When the 5 tractors drove into Lan City, the entire city was in an uproar. Countless people crowded on both sides of the streets just to catch a glimpse of this kind of metal monster. Next, it was the newly opened Royal Geely Tractor 4S shop. Someone explained the parameters and functions of the tractors in front of the shop. Of course, most people couldn't understand and were just there to watch the excitement. However, when the sale started, 200 tractors were sold in a flash, and more than 500 were reserved. Of course, some of these people were from the various departments, and some were arranged by Rinpoche himself. What surprised him was that the Zhang family and a few other merchants from the Yun nation had reserved nearly 100 tractors. It had to be said that these families had a really keen sense of smell. As for the commoners, when these tractors sped through the roads and fields of Dayo and the Yun nation, the commoners would clearly see the difference between this new machine and the previous manpower and animal power. Naturally, they would know how to choose. He was also prepared to publish chicken soup for the soul in the newspapers for a few days. The story of an ordinary person who paid off his loan within a year after buying a tractor and then reached the pinnacle of his life and married a fair, rich, and beautiful woman. Do you really not want great Xia? You have to know that there are tens of millions of people, a vast land, and countless mines. It should be able to achieve your goals faster. On the second day after the tractors entered the city, Zhongshang brought up the old matter again. He now felt that this land was the best in Rinpoche's hands. Rinpoche could change this land. The things that he could do couldn't be done by others. I've said that I'm not interested. Rinpoche waved his hand. Did he want to tire himself to death with the addition of Great Xia? Besides, the changes in this world are gradual and affect each other. The changes in Dayo will eventually bring changes to Great Xia and the Chen nation. I just need to hold the rope and let them dance with me. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 984. Half a month later, after half a month of driving training, the first batch of 200 tractors finally set off. 60 of them were carrying a large amount of glassware, animal skins, and spices to the Yun nation. Others went to the Protectorate of the Southeast and the Protectorate of the North, and some directly brought the parts for rotary tillage into the fields. Little Shirtu, where have you been these days? Earth doesn't care anymore? What is this? It can actually run on its own? These people all lived in farms outside the city, so they had heard very little about tractors. When they saw a young man driving the strange thing back, they were all amazed. Call me Mischievous Stone, don't call me Little Stone. This is a tractor. You've never heard of it, right? It can be used to transport goods and plow fields. It's a new invention of Zhao Prince Consort. Mischievous Stone showed off. This thing can plow the land? What are these round ones for? Many people were amazed. That's a tire. Don't stab it with a knife. I'm telling you, whoever stabs it, I'll fight with you. The man who was originally sitting on the tractor and showing off according to the script suddenly jumped down in exasperation. Everyone chuckled and dispersed. How about it? Do you want to compete and see who can plow faster? What's there to compete about physical labor? 1 tael of silver. If you win, I'll give you a tael of silver. If you win, you'll work for me for a day. An ordinary citizen's monthly income was no more than 1 tael to 1.5 taels of silver. How could they refuse such a good opportunity? Immediately, a few strong men spoke up. How do we compete? The 6 of us will compete together. If the 5 of you can plow faster and better than me, I'll consider it your win. I'll give you a tael of silver. If the 5 of you can't beat me, then come and work for me for a day. Bah, are you looking down on us? Do you want to find a place to practice? The few burly men immediately said angrily. Whether you think highly of me or not, we'll talk about it after we compete. This time, let's compete in plowing the land, not in punching and kicking. Mischievous Stone chuckled. Little Shirtu, just wait to pay up. The few burly men said one after another. All right, tomorrow morning, we'll start at dawn. Mischievous Stone laughed and said, Get out of the way, I won't care if you bump into me. He stepped on the accelerator, and the tractor drove away with a tutu-tutu sound. TSK, this thing is really fresh. Speaking of which, Zhao Prince Consort is really amazing. So many things were made by him. Yes. Although he isn't strong, all the new things in Lan City in recent years are related to him. Nonsense. How could His Majesty's judgment be wrong? Otherwise, why would Her Majesty choose him to be her husband even though we have so many experts and talents? He must be amazing. Did you hear? A few years ago, Zhao Prince Consort had a duel with someone and created such a huge pit outside the city. I went to see it when I entered the city. It was more than 100 meters. I also went to take a look. I heard that a single strike created such a huge crater. Everyone was talking about him. After a few years, the people around Lan City had changed their opinion of him. However, everyone still felt that even though Zhao Prince Consort was impressive, it didn't mean that he knew how to farm. They didn't believe that such a thing could surpass 5 strong laborers and the 4-corn cow. The next morning, before dawn, everyone arrived at the field. Even those who weren't participating in the competition were willing to come and watch the show. More than half of the 100 people in the village had arrived. Little Shirtu isn't here yet? Don't tell me that guy is still sleeping. Let's wait. Why don't someone go and wake him up? Just when everyone was getting impatient, they heard a flapping sound from afar. He's here, he's here. Why is this thing farting along the way? These words immediately caused a burst of laughter. However, everyone was somewhat envious of Little Shirtu, who was riding a steel monster with a trail of smoke all the way from afar. This thing looked very cool. However, what everyone couldn't understand was how Little Shirtu got so much money. The weight of this steel monster wasn't light, and the price was definitely not something that ordinary people could afford. It wasn't easy for Little Shirtu to fork out 3 taels of silver. Where did he get the money to buy such a steel monster? Hee, everyone is early. Little Shirtu, it's time for the competition, right? There are 5 of us and only 1 of you? I'll give you a chance to correct yourself lest you say that we are bullying you. Although these people were fierce, they were still simple and kind enough to remind him. Just don't say that I am bullying you when the time comes. Little Shirtu waved his hand confidently. A few days ago, he had seen a demonstration of this thing. "K, don't talk nonsense. It just so happens that the newly refurbished land is ready to be plowed. You guys start from that end. Little Shirtu, start from this end." "Okay, let's do that." Little Shirtu smiled and drove the tractor to the other end of the field. When they arrived at the edge of the field, Little Shirtu first pressed down the raised rotary tiller, and the gears were deeply embedded in the soil. He turned his head to look into the distance and saw that the people had already begun to work. Little Shirtu sat back on the tractor and touched it here and there. He couldn't hide the love in his heart. He didn't expect that such a good thing would fall into his hands. It was all thanks to his uncle, Tai Dao. After touching the brand new steel monster, Little Shirtu smiled and stepped on the accelerator. After installing the rotary tiller, the speed of the tractor slowed down a bit. He could feel the resistance from the soil. However, the steel monster under him still moved forward without hesitation. The people who were observing from a distance suddenly let out a soft cry. He turned his head to look at the 5 people. At this time, each of them had almost plowed a quarter of the field. Moreover, they used manpower to plow first, and then used horned cows. This way, they could save more animal power and could plow an additional 2 mu in a day. The 5 people plowed a total of 40 mu in a day. The strange thing under Little Shirtu's feet could plow 40 mu? Time slowly passed, and when the sun was about to reach the sky, everyone's expression changed. The 5 people next to them had already taken a break, but Little Shirtu's speed didn't slow down at all. He kept plowing at the same speed without stopping, and he had already caught up with the 5 people. The 5 people plowed 25 mu in the morning, which was already their fastest speed. In the afternoon, they could plow at most 15 mu. On the other hand, Little Shirtu plowed 30 mu in the morning, but the steel monster under him still didn't look tired at all. This gave everyone a bad premonition in their hearts. Could it be that this thing was comparable to 5 people and 5 horned cows? In the afternoon, the speed of the 5 people next to them had slowed down, but Little Shirtu was still plowing at the same speed. The thing behind him, which had been rotating all the time, was still constantly turning the soil. It wasn't until the evening that Little Shirtu wiped his sweat and jumped down from the tractor. He raised his eyebrows and said, "How is it? Are you convinced now?" Everyone's eyes weren't on him, but on the steel monster under Little Shirtu. This thing plowed 60 mu of land for a whole day, and it didn't stop at all. It was simply terrifying. Damn it. A man who was sweating profusely cursed. This thing is really strong. Yes, the 5 of them had used up all their strength and plowed 45 mu of land. However, this thing's stability was simply despairingly stable. Hee hee. Little Shirtu laughed rather contentedly. Are you willing to admit defeat? Bah? Am I someone who doesn't keep to my words? Do you believe that I won't let you have a taste of my fist? Night came, but the excitement in the farm didn't subside. A group of people surrounded the tractor and discussed it. At the same time, they asked Little Shirtu about the situation of this thing and its price. When they heard that it cost 200 taels, everyone was a bit silent. This thing was good, but unfortunately, they couldn't afford it. Don't think it's too expensive. Let me tell you, this thing is worth 10 laborers. 10 laborers can earn 100 taels a year, and you can earn it back in 2 years. How can we have so much money? Speaking of which, where did you get the money from? Someone asked. Don't worry about me. As for the money, this thing can be paid in installments. Zhao Prince Consort said that in order to improve the situation of us commoners, Her Majesty will use her own pocket to pay for it first. After that, we will pay a little more every year, and it will take up to 5 years at most. Do the math. After 5 years, we will pay 40 taels of silver a year. This thing can be used by 10 laborers to earn 100 taels a year, and the remaining 60 taels will belong to us. Moreover, after I pay off His Majesty's debt in 5 years, this thing will be mine. After Little Shirtu finished speaking, The people around him began to count with their fingers and toes. After a long time, they still couldn't figure out if this was the case. What he said seems to make sense. Let me think about it, someone said hesitantly. For the commoners, 200 taels of silver was an astronomical figure. Even if this figure was placed in front of them, it would be difficult for them to decide what to do. Most of them would just wait and see. In fact, this was Rinpoche's objective. After all, the current production of tractors was completely insufficient. What he was doing now was to make tractors deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. 2 to 3 years later, when the lives of the first batch of people using tractors improved, the tractor market would be fully launched. Little Shirtu also said in a timely manner, "It's just like how you can buy it now if you want to. Let me tell you, 200 taels of silver. Don't you see how heavy this thing is? It's all made of iron, and the iron alone weighs more than 500 kilograms. I heard that Zhao Prince Consort is selling it at a loss, and Her Majesty is paying for it to make our lives better. Otherwise, believe it or not, this thing can't even be bought with 1,000 taels of silver. This thing already weighs more than 500 kilograms of iron. Can 200 taels of silver buy 500 kilograms of iron? However, I'm just saying this to you. There aren't many of these things now. The 6 departments have reserved them for a few months, let alone you guys. As for me, don't forget that I have an uncle who works under Zhao Prince Consort." After hearing little Shidu's words, everyone began to feel grateful for the Empress's kindness. The Empress's reputation was already high, but she was so considerate of them, which made them deeply moved. Zhao Prince Consort's prestige had also greatly increased in their hearts. At the same time, they began to warm up to the tractors. Sometimes, they would hesitate when something was placed in front of them. However, when they couldn't buy it even if they wanted to, the situation would be reversed. Rinpoche looked at the information in his hand and was quite satisfied. These people had done a good job. He estimated that the tractors that went to the Yun nation would return in a few days. At this time, Zhongshang was sitting in the carriage and looking at the letter in his hand with a smile on his face. He and the others had only traveled half the distance, and the tractors that set off at the same time with so many goods had actually arrived at Pingdu a few hours ago. Amazing! It's really amazing! Zhongshang exclaimed. According to Zhao Prince Consort, this kind of thing had actually been eliminated on the other side of the sea. However, it was already enough to shock everyone here. They didn't know what the better things were like. No, he had seen better things, such as quantum transmission. Unfortunately, he couldn't understand it. At this time, the Yun nation was also shocked by those iron monsters. In particular, the merchants who had been paying attention couldn't sit still. Chapter 985. Wangjing, the former capital of the Yun nation, had once again regained its prosperity after 3 years of war. Many people lived a befuddled life. What the commoners talked about the most was the half-veiled woman in Qingyi Alley, the romantic affairs of the scholars, and the extravagant spending of money by Taiwanese businessmen. It was as if everyone had consciously forgotten that the world above them had changed. Or rather, it was the nature of the people of the Yun nation to live a befuddled life. Although there was still a gap compared to a few years ago, the people of Wangjing could still find some comfort in it. It seemed that nothing had changed. They only needed to ignore the tall and strong men that appeared from time to time in the city. As long as they didn't violate the few simple rules set by the Aboriginals, then everything would remain the same. Naturally, the few simple rules of the Aboriginals became a point of ridicule for the Aboriginal barbarians. However, for most people, the fewer the rules, the better. At noon, the sun shone down and scorched their bodies. The arrogant soldiers at the city gate were now obediently inspecting the pedestrians and caravans. On top of the city gate, there was a team of Aboriginal burly men wearing leather armor and carrying steel knives. At the moment, there were about 100 people queuing outside the city gate. Among them, 3 caravans accounted for half of them. There were also a few carriages with unknown people in them, and the rest were commoners with traces of weathering. Occasionally, the people would look up and see the burly men standing on top of the city gate. The irritation that was caused by the scorching sun seemed to have been doused with a basin of ice water. No matter who they were, they could only wait in queue. Those barbarians. A young man put down the curtain and snorted. It's already much better than what we originally thought, isn't it? An old man said faintly. Compared to a few decades ago, the Aboriginals are already quite restrained. Their methods are also hard and soft. If this continues, the Yun nation will no longer exist in 100 years. Seeing the young man's nonchalant expression, the old man's expression became serious. If I find out that you are in contact with those people again, I will kick you out of the family. Got it, the young man replied with his head lowered. Seeing that the young man had agreed, the old man closed his eyes to rest. Not long after, he heard chaotic noises coming from outside. The old man opened his eyes and asked unhappily, "What happened?" "I'll go take a look." The moment the young man got out of the carriage, he heard a t sound. He turned his head to look behind him and his jaw dropped. He saw a bunch of strange-looking mounts covered in iron armor squeezing forward from the back. There was an Aboriginal sitting on the back of each of the mounts, and there was another Aboriginal sitting on the back of the carriage that they were pulling. "Get out of the way, get out of the way." The people lining up to enter the city made way for him. "Yen Nan." Hearing the shouts from the carriage, the young man took another look at the strange armored mounts before entering the carriage. "Father, it's a group of ancient race tribesmen. However, their mounts are really weird." "Pausa." The old man was non-committal. It was recorded in the ancient books that there were all kinds of ferocious beasts in the 60,000 mountains. "It doesn't seem to be alive." The young man thought about it and confirmed, "That's right, it's not alive." The old man was taken aback. He pulled open the curtain at the side and turned his head to look behind him. All he saw was a strange thing emitting smoke moving toward him. The old man stared at the strange thing until it passed by him. He was finally sure that it was just as Yen Nan had said. It wasn't alive. Below it were carriage-like wheels. There was no traction, but it could move on its own. Furthermore, the carriage that it was pulling was at least a few times larger than the ox cart. This thing was really strong. Then came the second one, the third one, and a total of 30 of them passed by him and entered Wang capital without stopping. No one was surprised that no one dared to stop the Aboriginals from entering the city. Everyone's attention wasn't on them. Instead, they were on those weird things. After the Aboriginals left, the people who were hiding at the side returned to the path. Smelling the weird odor, they were all surprised. That's right. The 30 tractors entering the city caused quite a commotion in Wang capital. Many people scrambled to avoid these monsters and gathered together to discuss them after they left. As for the people on the tractors, they were very proud of themselves. They had learned 2 words from Zhao Prince Consort. One was galloping like lightning, and the other was flashy. Although these tractors weren't galloping like lightning, they were flashy enough for them to show off. Unfortunately, they were in front of the people of the Yun Nation and not in Lan City. However, they would return very soon. These 30 tractors created a huge splash in Wang capital. 10 days later, the caravan brought back some news that really set off a storm in Wang capital. It would only take 3 days to travel from Lan City to Pingdu and 2 days to travel from Pingdu to Wangjing, which could carry more than 5 ox carts of goods. Furthermore, only 1 or 2 people would be needed. Before this, it would take at least 15 days to transport the goods. Anyone with a bit of knowledge would know what this meant. Furthermore, it would only take 5 days to transport the Aboriginal army from Lan City to Wang capital. This speed made their hair stand on end. The consumption of rations was also extremely low, and it allowed the soldiers to maintain their full strength. For some people, their faces turned ugly when they heard this news. Fortunately, there weren't many of these things at the moment. Otherwise, they would be able to sleep. However, if they knew that the Aboriginals were currently building a strange thing that could allow an army to travel from Lan City to the Yun Nation in 2 days and carry a large number of military supplies, they would have gone to bed right now. Some people were worried and, naturally, some were happy. Many merchants' eyes lit up when they found out about this so-called transportation tool. In particular, The price was only 200 taels of silver, which made them wish they could immediately grow wings and fly to Lon City to order a batch. Unfortunately, Lon City had temporarily closed the reservation and would only open again in at least half a year. Many people had already planned to send people to reserve some when the time came. With this thing, the speed of transporting goods would be greatly increased, and the time and manpower consumed would be reduced by more than half. As for the ordinary people, they were more surprised that there was such a thing in this world and that it had appeared in Dayo. For a period of time, people were everywhere discussing this strange tool that could move on its own without the help of animals. The more they talked about it, the more outrageous it became. It could travel 500 kilometers in a day and 800 kilometers in a night, its head was bigger than a city gate, and it could spit fire when it opened its mouth. The words, Zhao Prince Consort, were once again heard by everyone. Ren Baqian put down the information on the repercussions caused by the tractor in various places. These were all within his expectations. Many of them were even personally arranged by him, such as those in the countryside. The results were very good, but it was a pity that it would take at least a few years to achieve his goal. His short-term goal was still the aboriginals in the 60,000 mountains. After pondering for a while, Rinpoche picked up another stack of papers. This was what the Empress threw at him. It was the registration form for returning home. Lu Su, ranked 56th in the world. Spirit Wheel. Condensed a heaven-grade weapon. Handled by Blood Sea Demon. Chen Yuanping, ranked 73rd in the world. Spirit Wheel. Condensed a heaven-grade weapon. Handled by Blood Sea Demon. Zhao Zhao Zhao, ranked 75th in the world. Spirit Wheel. Condensed a heaven-grade weapon. Handled by Blood Sea Demon. Louis, ranked 83rd in the world. Spirit Wheel. Condensed a heaven-grade weapon. Handled by Blood Sea Demon. Murong Qing, ranked 88th in the world. Spirit Wheel. Condensed a heaven-grade weapon. Handled by Blood Sea Demon. Dong Cheng, not on the list of experts. Tianlun. It had been a few months. Looking at the stack of membership forms in his hands, Rinpoche wanted to give Blood Sea Demon a thumbs up. His actions and work efficiency were enough for Rinpoche to award him a Model Worker Medal. Of course, Rinpoche wasn't sure how many of these people really wanted to join and how many only wanted to join because he held a knife to their necks. In any case, according to the notes from the rearguard commandery, half of them fought with Blood Sea Demon. And now, Blood Sea Old Devil was heading towards Coiling Dragon Valley. That was his old enemy. Blood Sea Old Devil had been entangled with them for dozens of years. Every time, it would be one against the other or a group of them against him. Now, he finally had a helper. Zhao 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 and Murong Qing went with Blood Sea Demon. Rinpoche was more interested in Dong Cheng. It had been a few years since he came to this world, but this was the first time he saw a Heaven Wheel practitioner. The Heaven Wheel was the only way to advance from the Earth Wheel level to the Spirit Wheel level. It was also known as the path to heaven. Rushing through the gates of heaven would allow one to be reborn. If one couldn't, one would remain an Earth Wheel expert for the rest of their life. Generally, a practitioner would only stay at the Heaven Wheel level for a short period of time, ranging from a month to a year or two at most. They would either soar to the sky or fall to the ground. Therefore, practitioners at this stage would focus on their cultivation, which was extremely rare. The reason why Blood Sea Old Ghost reported this person was because of his potential. Heaven Wheel at the age of 23. Although he was far from being comparable to someone like Li Yuanzhu, he still had great potential. If everything went well, he would be able to reach the Spirit Wheel level within a year or two. Chapter 986. The Coiling Dragon Valley had a very strange topography. In the middle of the valley, there was a towering mountain, and around the mountain was a twisted river. Looking down from the mountain, it looked like a coiled dragon. This mountain was called the Pillar of Heaven's Mountain, and there was a Tianmen sect on the mountain. In the past, it was considered an extremely famous sect in Great Xia, and it had never declined for hundreds of years. However, in recent decades, its reputation had plummeted, and it was all because of one person. He was like an unkillable cockroach. He advanced from the earth wheel to the spirit wheel, condensed a heaven-grade weapon, and finally became a top expert in the world. Because of his persistent pestering, the Heavenly Gates sect had suffered great losses over the years, and its reputation had plummeted. More than once, the people in the sect blamed the person who provoked this great enemy, but they didn't dare to show it. That person was the current Tianmen sect leader. No one knew if the sect leader regretted his youthful recklessness. However, everyone was clear about one thing. At this point, the Tianmen sect could no longer retreat. If they took a step back now, the last bit of face of the Heaven Gate would be gone. In the future, when others talked about the Heavenly Gates sect, they would say that it had been pulled down from the top sect by one person and ended up in a state of disgrace. The Heavenly Gates sect would no longer need to be seen by others, and even their ancestors would have to jump out of their graves. On this day, someone, that bastard is here again. We've reached the entrance of the valley. Who? Old Ghost? Quickly informed the sect leader. As soon as the Blood River demon arrived at the entrance of the valley, the Tianmen sect, which used to be a top sect, felt as if it was facing a formidable enemy. It could be seen how much pressure the Blood River demon had put on the Tianmen sect. In fact, it was not only the Heavenly Gate sect. No matter who provoked such an unkillable opponent who became stronger the more they fought, everyone would feel numb. Even though he didn't do anything bad in Rinpoche's eyes, everyone in the Tianmen sect felt that he was an evil spirit through and through. Many people had heard of his notoriety ever since they entered the sect. Not long after, he and Old Ghost swaggered to the front of the Heaven Gate sect's mountain gate. A blood-red blade appeared in their hands. Upon closer inspection, the blade looked like flowing blood. It was so red that it made people panic, and it gave off a bloody smell. Old Ghost he raised the blood saber in his hand and was about to destroy the mountain gate. A loud shout suddenly came from the sky, "Impudent!" A giant sword fell from the sky. He cackled as he retreated several tens of feet in a flash. The dust in front of him dissipated to reveal a middle-aged man who appeared to be in his 50s. A 3-meter-tall giant sword was stabbed into the ground in front of him. In fact, both of them were much older than they looked. Blood River Old Ghost had been at odds with the Tianmen sect for 70 years. It was just that their spirit will level made time pass exceptionally slowly for them. You really won't give up. Today, I will let you fall here, so that you do not harm others. The middle-aged man angrily rebuked. Let out a weird laugh. Slaughter? Who did I hurt? My Heaven's Gate sect's Elder Lin, Elder Fu, the Outer sect's Steward Lu, and dozens of true disciples all died at your hands. This blood feud will be repaid today. The middle-aged man scolded. But, serves you right. Blood River rolled his eyes and spat out a mouthful of phlegm. Blood River, you're courting death. Another 4 people descended from the sky, surrounding Blood River from all directions. These 4 people were of different genders and ages. There were 3 men and 1 woman, but they were all at the spirit wheel level. However, my main purpose today isn't to fight. Blood River Old Ghost changed his tone. The middle-aged man was slightly stunned. Blood River's main purpose today wasn't to fight? Why was that? After fighting for so many years, he didn't believe that Blood River Old Ghost would stop. If Blood River Old Ghost was willing to stop, he would have done so long ago. A demon like you must be punished, but I want to know what you want to do. The Tianmen sect chief put his hands behind his back. TSK, I just want to ask if you want to join us. If you are willing to join us, I might let you off. Everyone sneered. You want to let us off? Even if you are one of the few experts in the world, your words are too arrogant. Blood River hesitated for a moment and said in a muffled voice, Go Home Public Welfare Organization. In the end, he was too embarrassed to say the full name. Everyone was confused. What was he talking about? Those who are in cahoots with a demon like you are definitely evil. The Tianmen sect is a famous sect. How can we have anything to do with you scoundrels? The middle-aged man reprimanded with a sullen face, but he was vigilant. What organization did Blood River actually join? What kind of people were in this organization? From what he said, he actually wanted to pull him in. Presumably, the other people in the organization weren't mediocre. Then, he made up his mind to keep Blood River here today no matter what. Previously, Blood River was already so difficult to deal with. If other people joined in, the danger would be greatly increased. He didn't know if Blood River brought any helpers today. Blood River revealed a strange smile and said, "You better think carefully. This was proposed by Zhao Prince Consort of Dayo. You actually surrendered to the barbarians." Blood River, you want our Tianmen sect to surrender to the barbarians? You are really thinking the wrong way. This is simply wishful thinking, the Tianmen sect chief scolded angrily. Blood River, you deserve to die 1,000 times over. A few people beside him also spoke up. However, everyone was happy. Previously, Blood River and the Tianmen sect were two parties, and it wasn't appropriate for the other sects to intervene. Now that Blood River had surrendered to the foreign races, the other sects wouldn't let him off if this news got out. "So, you guys aren't willing to join us?" Blood River smiled sinisterly. "Nonsense, why would we associate ourselves with you scoundrels and barbarians? If you say so, then this old man is relieved." Blood River suddenly laughed loudly. How could he hope that his enemies of so many years would join his organization? Previously, he didn't make it clear and deliberately pointed out the identity of Zhao Prince Consort of Dayo. He didn't mention Li Yuanzhu, Li Fu, and the others at all. He was just waiting for them to say this. After saying this, they could die. Men, set up the formation. The Tianmen sect chief commanded. Another 36 people descended from the mountain, all of whom were at the earthwheel level. They formed 2 circles with the previous 4 people and surrounded Blood River. "Today, we will get rid of this evil for the people. Since you guys refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, it's your turn to attack with me, my 2 brothers." Blood River laughed. "Indeed, you brought helpers." The Tianmen sect chief made up his mind. It was better to appear now than to be caught off guard later. However, when the 2 of them walked out from afar and appeared in front of everyone, their expressions changed. "For you, Zhao Zhao Zhao, Mrongqing." The faces of everyone from the Tianmen sect changed drastically. The appearance of the tractor had given Dayo and the Yun nation a lot more vitality. Like blood carrying oxygen to all parts of the body, the tractors that traveled to and fro delivered supplies to other places in a very short period of time. In particular, tractors could be seen entering and exiting several city gates almost every day, transporting large amounts of supplies in and out of Lan City. Lan City's glass products, spices, and animal hides were all popular in the Yun nation and brought in a lot of profits. The cost of a cart of glass products was only a few hundred taels of silver, but it could be sold for tens of thousands of taels of silver in the Yun nation. This was even after lowering the selling price. After all, the Yun nation was now considered a part of Dayo. Even if they were shaving wool, they couldn't let the other party rebound. Otherwise, how were they going to sell the rest of the products? The profit of spices was no less than that of glass products. 50 grams of spices could be sold for 5 to 10 taels of silver, and a cart contained 5,000 kilograms of spices. In just 3 months, Rinpochian had transferred a large amount of inventory that he had accumulated to the Yun nation, and he expected to bring back a profit of more than 3 million taels of silver. However, such a huge profit wouldn't last long. Glass products, mercury mirrors, and spices were mainly targeted at the wealthy. Although the Yun nation was wealthy, the market was still limited. Transferring so much inventory into the market in a short period of time would inevitably saturate the market. After that, it would be a long time coming. Besides, Rinpochian wasn't going to use spices to shave wool anymore. Previously, because spices were the Empress's industry, others were prohibited from growing them for a few years. Coupled with this batch of spices, spices had brought more than 3 million taels of silver to the imperial family in the past few years. Now that almost all the officials in the imperial court had stopped growing food and switched to growing spices, it was expected that the price of spices would plummet in the near future. This was also in Rinpochian's plan. As a native of Earth, he never felt that spices should be a luxury. The price of spices and white sugar should eventually reach several times the price of white salt. Now that the price of salt in the Yun nation had risen to 120 copper coins, the price of spices and white sugar shouldn't exceed 10 times the price of salt. The price of salt in Dayo had stabilized at about 300 copper coins from one tael of silver previously. Although it was still higher than Rinpoche's expectations, the price of salt had already made the people of Dayo feel very happy. In the past, roasted meat was carefully sprinkled with a thin layer of salt. Now, people could eat a mouthful of meat and lick a mouthful of salt. In 3 months, the other 500 tractors were delivered. There were more tractors traveling between Lon City and the Yun nation every day, especially the nearly 100 tractors ordered by those families. They were directly put into the transportation of goods, greatly increasing the transportation capacity and reducing the time taken by more than half. This made the others even more envious. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 987. In December of the 76th year of the Dayo calendar, the Royal Geely Tractor 4S shop opened in Lon City, and the first batch of 200 tractors officially appeared in front of everyone in the world. In February of the 77th year of the Dayo calendar, the second batch of 500 tractors was delivered. There were at least 300 tractors going back and forth between Lon City and the Yun nation, transporting large amounts of iron, food, cloth, salt, and other materials. The monthly transportation volume could reach 7 million kilograms. In the past, this transportation volume required more than 10,000 people and 7,000 four-corn cows. During this period, countless grains and fodder were consumed. Now, it only required a maximum of 600 people. This saved more than 95% of manpower and animal power, as well as countless grains and fodder. What was consumed was biodiesel, which was considered cheap in comparison. For the first batch of merchants who received the tractors, the caravan originally required at least 30 to 40 vehicles and more than 100 people. Less than 20 of the vehicles were loaded with goods, while the rest were loaded with grains and fodder consumed on the road. It would take more than 100 people a month to transport 20,000 kilograms of goods back and forth. The personnel expenses alone would cost more than 200 taels of silver, and the grains and fodder consumed on the road were worth nearly 100 taels of silver. Now, only one tractor and 2 people were needed to achieve the same transportation volume. The personnel expenses were less than 10 taels of silver, and the so-called biodiesel consumed was about 120 liters, which was worth 20 taels of silver, for a round trip of more than 3,000 kilometers. In other words, after investing 1,000 taels of silver, the monthly expenses would be less than 90 taels of silver, which was 70% lower than the previous transportation cost of a caravan. The most important thing was that it saved a lot of manpower and material resources. It was more flexible and fast, and it could transport the required goods to the destination in a short period of time. The value of this was more important than the savings in silver. Previously, due to the limited transportation volume, they could only transport about 20,000 kilograms of goods at a time. It was difficult for the caravan to turn around, and the risk was great. In particular, Dayo had a rainy season that lasted for more than 5 months. If the caravan was trapped somewhere, the losses would be even greater. Now, they were no longer subject to this restriction and could easily transport goods that were 10 times or even dozens of times their original volume. As a result, the caravan's goods weren't just those that were highly profitable, but there were also many more types of goods. After all, the market for those high-profit goods was limited. After the market supply and demand reached a balance, they set their sights on other goods. In just a few months, the prices of many goods in both places had dropped. In the Yun nation, the prices of meat, grains, herbs, needles, and thread had dropped. A large number of four-corn cows, sweet potatoes, and other high-yielding crops had caused the prices of beef and grains to drop by 10%. Sweet potatoes and potatoes, which were both vegetables and grains, had become an important part of the meals of ordinary people in the Yun nation in a short period of time. In fact, the merchants of the Yun nation didn't care much about the profits from selling potatoes and sweet potatoes. A trip of 2,500 caddies would result in a profit of 2 copper coins per caddy, which was only 10,000 copper coins, which was close to 9 taels of silver. The profit of 10 tractors traveling from Dayo to the Yun nation was no more than 90 taels. However, after Rinpoche expressed his stance in private, those families immediately knew what to do. The prices of salt, cloth, tea leaves, wine, and ironware in Lan City dropped again. Although the iron mines were controlled by the Dayo imperial court, there were a lot of ironware in the Yun nation. Those merchants naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity. Even though pots and knives were expensive in the Yun nation, they couldn't be compared to those in Lan City. Stop manufacturing rotary plowing pendants and switch to the production of harvesting pendants, Rinpoche said to his subordinate. That thing is quite useful, but it consumes too much fuel, the man replied honestly. Well, got it. Rinpoche nodded. That's right, it consumed too much fuel. It was fine if tractors were used for transportation, but the biggest problem arose when they were used in agriculture. Although tractors could indeed save manpower and could rotate 60 mu of land in a day, the problem of fuel consumption became the biggest problem that restricted the use of tractors. 1 mu of land cost 3 liters of oil and half a tael of silver. 100 mu of land would cost 50 taels of silver. Which commoner could afford it? It had to be known that a laborer could only do this for 20 days at most. Could a laborer earn 50 taels of silver a year? He might not even earn 50 taels of silver a year. Moreover, there was still sowing, weeding, irrigation, and harvesting. As a result, after the initial enthusiasm, compared to transportation, which was now favored by everyone, the most important aspect of tractors was agriculture. Of course, this didn't mean that tractors had no value, but that they were limited by the number of mu of land in Dayo and the price of oil. The strength of the fork-horned cow and the aboriginals was also a factor. On Earth, a cow and a strong laborer could only plow about 2 mu of land in a day with iron plows. Here, they could plow 6 mu of land in a day with wooden plows. In addition, due to the limited number of mu of land, it was difficult for tractors to be used. To change the situation, one way was to concentrate on farming on a large scale, such as the newly reclaimed fields by the Ministry of Works. Another way was to lower the price of oil. According to the current price of grain, the price of oil should be limited to about 20 copper coins. On Earth, 1 caddy of grain cost 2 to 3 copper coins, and diesel cost 6 to 7 copper coins, which was twice the price of grain. Here, grain cost 8 to 10 copper coins, but diesel cost 400 copper coins per liter, which was 40 times the price of grain. It was considered a sky-high price. Unfortunately, it was difficult to lower the price of oil in a short period of time. The current price was almost the cost. They could only wait for the area of land reclamation to expand, the production of high oil crops such as soybeans to increase, and the technology to produce biodiesel to lower the price of diesel. This matter couldn't be rushed. Then, Rinpoche took a look at the research progress of the new tractor. This was a new type of tractor with 50 horsepower. It had more horsepower, faster speed, and stronger off-road capabilities. The research progress wasn't fast. After all, it was limited by current technology and processes. Many of the originally mature technologies couldn't be used and had to be redesigned. After looking at it for a while, Rinpoche put down the information and went back to the palace. Upon entering the Changal Palace, he heard the crisp laughter of a girl. Along the shade of the trees, he saw a girl rolling around on the lawn with a child wearing a red cloth. The girl was wearing silk clothes, and her arms and legs were rolled up to her elbows and knees. Rinpoche was very familiar with this girl. She was Zhu Hua, a level 9 student with an IQ of 9 and grades of 9. These days, Rinpoche got her to take care of Chiyuqing. Although Zhu Hua was very wild and not very smart, she actually did a good job. At least the little fellow was quite happy. Zhu Hua seemed to be having fun as well. Rinpoche felt that this was probably because their IQs were on the same level and they had found a kindred spirit. Looking at the two frolicking around, Rinpoche felt a sense of accomplishment as a father, especially when he saw his daughter grow up happily. She really grew up. Looking at Chi Yuqing, who was already 1 meter tall, Rinpoche rubbed his chin and pondered. Wasn't she growing a little too fast? It had only been 6 months. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 988. Wow! When Chi Yuqing saw Rinpoche, she stretched out her chubby little hands and cheered. A grasshopper fell from her hand and quickly jumped away after escaping danger. Principal! Zhu Hua turned to look at Rinpoche and rolled on the lawn again. This lawn was recently trimmed by Rinpoche. It turned out to be weeds that were half the height of a person, and the little fellow couldn't find them after burrowing into them. However, she especially liked to burrow into the weeds, catch bugs, butterflies, bees, and roaring emperors, and stuff them into her mouth. This was a bad habit that Rinpoche discovered. It seemed that she was using her tongue to feel the world and wanted to put everything she saw into her mouth to taste, whether it was flowers, insects, or even soil. This included Rinpoche's hand, which still had a row of imprints. After being beaten up by the Empress, she only dared to sneak around and bite whatever she saw when the Empress wasn't around. For example, there were still blue and red stains on Chi Yuqing's mouth from biting flowers. Hua. Rinpoche smiled and patted her head. The little fellow rubbed his palm hard and looked extremely happy. Her Majesty told you not to call her Hua. Zhu Hua muttered. Anyway, you won't tell on me, Rinpoche said. Of course, I, Zhu Hua, will never tell on you. Zhu Hua immediately vowed with a firm face. However, it was to no avail. Rinpoche knew Zhu Hua too well. It would be strange if she could hide secrets with that brain of hers, and she might spill the beans at any time. However, Rinpoche didn't care about this. He reached out and picked her up. Come, call me Daddy. The little fellow looked at Rinpoche and was confused at first. Then she smiled and slapped his face with both hands. Rinpoche felt a strong wind blowing against his face. His upper body leaned back, and Chi Yuqing slapped empty air. Chi Yuqing looked at Rinpoche doubtfully and subconsciously bit her finger. Rinpoche sighed softly and said, "Don't slap your daddy in the future." If he was slapped by her, even though he wouldn't be injured, he would definitely be disgraced. The little fellow was too strong. Fortunately, her hands were short. Rinpoche tossed her up, and she immediately burst into laughter. After playing for a while, he placed the little fellow on the ground and pointed at himself. Dead. The little fellow looked at Rinpoche, pointed to himself, and said in a tender voice, "Father." Rinpoche grinned, and his smile gradually widened. Pointing at himself, "Dad." The little guy finally learned the first word. Although it was only 6 months, which was much earlier than ordinary children, it was not surprising. As soon as the little fellow was born, he was prepared for the little fellow to ask for a stick in fluent Chinese and say that she wanted to swim in the river in less than 3 days. Fortunately, in terms of language, the little fellow was finally somewhat similar to an ordinary person. Following Rinpoche's actions, the little fellow pointed at herself with a smile and said, "Father." "I'm your father." Rinpoche pointed at himself again and tried to correct her mistake. He was the real father. However, the little guy still pointed at himself in confusion. Dead. Rinpoche thought about it and decided to give up on correcting her futile actions. Looking at the little guy who was almost as tall as his waist, he was indeed growing too fast. When the little fellow was born, she was twice the size of an ordinary baby and should be 60 to 70 centimeters long. Now, she was 1 meter tall and had grown 30 centimeters in half a year. He wondered how big she would be when she was 2 or 3 years old. He hoped that she would be more like an ordinary person. Rinpoche sincerely hoped that she would be more like an ordinary person. Although it was indeed gratifying to have an outstanding descendant, Rinpoche still hoped that she could have a childhood that was closer to that of an ordinary person and not go hunting tigers at the age of 1 and catch dragons at the age of 2. At night, Rinpoche seriously discussed very important matters with the Empress. "Your Majesty, what do you think Hua will call you after she learns to speak?" The empress replied without hesitation, "Mother? What about me? Father? Your Majesty, don't you feel awkward?" Renbaqian looked helpless. This was the problem. Children from ordinary families could just call each other father and mother. But him and the empress? How should the child be called? Why did it sound so awkward? And why did it sound even more awkward to call her father? The empress didn't care and said, "It's good that I don't feel awkward, and there's nothing wrong with it." In fact, there didn't seem to be anything wrong. Renbaqian sighed and said, "How about I call you mother and call me father?" The empress thought about it and said, "It sounds distant. Do you care about this a lot?" "I can't say that I care a lot." Renbaqian felt that he didn't have much of a choice in this matter. Besides, the empress didn't despise him when she chose him, right? However, he still felt somewhat awkward. Seeing that the empress was still staring at him, Renbaqian suddenly had a flash of inspiration and knew what the problem was. Other princesses and princes call the empress mother, but the problem is that I haven't been conferred the title of empress. I'm Zhao Prince Consort. There's nothing wrong with calling me father. The empress chuckled and said, "It seems that I have to confer you an empress." "No need, I'm fine now." Renbaqian waved his hands. Zhao Prince Consort was more used to it. The two of them laughed and chatted for a while before the little girl ran in from outside with her hands raised, followed by Zhu Hua, who had a head full of grass. "Slow down, princess." Qing Yuan and Hong Luan wanted to help her but didn't dare to. "Don't worry about her," Renbaqian said. The little girl ran straight to Renbaqian and the empress, pointed at herself, and said, "Father. Look, your daughter can talk." Renbaqian smiled and pointed at the little girl. "Erhua." The little girl stubbornly pointed at herself and said, "Father." Renbaqian saw that the little girl was now firmly convinced that she should call him father. The empress burst out laughing when she saw the two of them. 3 months after the delivery of the scheduled tractors, the second batch of 1,000 taels of tractors finally began to be sold. This time, it was much livelier than the previous time. In the past half a month, many merchants from the Yun nation had applied for clearance and arrived at Lan City. At the same time, they brought a large number of goods with them. In a short period of time, Lan City was very lively. The most lively place was the alley of the 4 courtyards. It was almost overcrowded. Although the brothels in Lan City had a strange custom, they didn't have the core of a normal brothel. In other words, they only sold their skills and not their bodies. This made many merchants from the Yun nation feel strange and even dissatisfied. However, this was Lan City, and they didn't dare to be presumptuous. Those who dared to be presumptuous were still in prison. Those merchants could only grit their teeth and accept it. However, in other places, they didn't have the opportunity to let the extremely talented Earth Wheel disciples of the sects accompany them in a drunken stupor. They could even take advantage of them. This was also the reason why the alley of the 4 courtyards was always full. As for why the 4 courtyards weren't allowed to sell their bodies, the 4 courtyards also felt that they were quite innocent. Was it their fault that Zhao Prince Consort, Minister Tong, and Minister Zhua visited a brothel? Your Majesty, you should look for Zhao Prince Consort and Minister Tong. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 989. Now that I have nothing to do, I'm here to ask if you prefer a bald head or a bald head. Or do you have any other nice-sounding choices? Actually, I quite like a bald head and have even shaved it before. It's a pity that the shape of my head doesn't suit me. I'm deeply regretful. The gigolo of the female empress's family, what kind of fan name do you like? Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 990. Damn it, that Lung Rong is obviously a whore, but she still dared to give me a hard time. A young man cursed indignantly as he walked under the street lamp. She is the most talented disciple of this generation in the Tangled Silk Palace. Coupled with her good looks, The number of practitioners pursuing her can line up from the tangled silk palace to the foot of the mountain. I reckon she would be the next palace master of the tangled silk palace. Another young man winked and laughed. It's hard for us to even see her, let alone get intimate with her. So what? Isn't she still a whore now? That young man wasn't polite at all. Forget it, everyone in the brothel in Wangjing decides who they want to see. Besides, this is Lan City. Even if you don't like it, you don't have to take it to heart. After hearing this, that young man finally calmed down a little. That's right, this was Lan City and not some other place. Even in Wangjing he couldn't do whatever he wanted, let alone here. Just as he suppressed the anger in his heart, he felt his body being dragged to the side by his companion. Make way! Make way! Just as the two of them reached the roadside, two huge figures swept past them. The wind brought by them blew directly on their faces. Although there were no sounds of hooves, every time the two huge figures landed on the ground, there would be a slight tremor. A red saber-toothed tiger and a leopard-like mount with horns on its head, as well as two people on their backs, disappeared into the darkness with loud laughter. If it weren't for his companion who pulled him, he would have been hit by these two big fellows and ended up with broken bones and tendons. However, the rider on their backs didn't even look at the two of them. This made him feel a little depressed. Although he was depressed, he really couldn't afford to offend these two people. After coming to Lan City for a few days, he had asked around. Although he hadn't seen these two people before, he had heard about these two mounts. The red saber-toothed tiger belonged to the public security official, Bai Shiying's residence, and it was said to have the strength of an advanced earth wheel expert. As for the horned mount, it belonged to the examination official's residence and also had the strength of an intermediate earth wheel expert. Not to mention the two people on its back, he couldn't even afford to offend these two mounts. One had to know that his family only had two guests who were at least at the earth wheel level, and one of them was only at the initial stage of the earth wheel level. Even he had to greet him respectfully when he met him. This kind of mount with the strength of an earth wheel expert wouldn't betray him easily. If he could obtain one, he would be the strongest person in the family. Even the family head wouldn't treat him lightly. Unfortunately, he could only dream about it. Have you heard? These things are called street lamps. They contain thunder and lightning inside, which is why they can emit such light. His companion whispered. The young man was not in a good mood at the moment, so he responded with a grunt. Of course he had heard of it, but he didn't believe it. It's hard to say if it's true or not, but it's really beautiful. His companion sighed again. The young man had to admit that even though Lan City wasn't as prosperous as Wang capital, the size of the city was much smaller. However, Lan City was indeed beautiful at night. The sleepless city truly lived up to its reputation. It was enough to make people sigh in admiration. Hey, Qingji, how many tractors do you think we can sell tomorrow? Another person suddenly asked. I don't know. In any case, we have to find a way to buy a few. The young man finally perked up. This was the purpose of his visit. There doesn't seem to be a lot of these things. Previously, those people waited for 3 months and only got 500. This time, it's the same as last time. But this time, there are a lot of people. Based on what they knew, at least dozens of families and caravans had come. There were probably more that they didn't know. Everyone's target was the tractors. Otherwise, who would come to this barren land to suffer? Even when walking, they had to stick close to the side. As long as we pay enough money, there will definitely be a way. Shinji said. Before coming here, the family had already considered this situation. Anything that could be solved with money wasn't a big deal. This thing was shockingly cheap. As long as one wasn't a fool, they naturally wouldn't think that it was because the aboriginals were stupid. In fact, the old fellows in the family had more or less analyzed the reason. This time, the bottom line given by the family was 5,000 taels of silver per tractor. This was also a more reasonable price for the aboriginals. After all, the materials used were there, and the cost could be estimated as well. Others were selling it for 200 taels, but they were willing to pay 5,000 taels. It wasn't because of their conscience. Conscience was a joke. It wasn't just for the caravans either. More importantly, It was to build a relationship with Zhao Prince Consort. Previously, those clans had shipped a lot of food because they followed Zhao Prince Consort's wishes. This left him with a good impression, and things became much smoother. Although they were a step late, as long as they were willing to pay the price, it wasn't impossible for them to catch up. To be able to build such a big family business, none of them were fools. Naturally, they knew the principle that money could only be earned if one could spend it. After all, the world was now in the hands of those barbarians. During Qi Zixiao's wedding, those people actually targeted the chancellors. It wasn't until this sudden order to withdraw that everyone realized who was the most important person. The next day, Qingji brought his attendants to the Imperial Geely Tractor 4S shop on Jingyang Street with confidence. Everyone could understand what Geely and tractors meant, but until now, no one knew what 4S meant. There was already a group of people waiting outside the Tractor 4S shop. Everyone was standing there obediently. At the side, there was a row of tall winged cavalry warriors who exuded a bloody aura, reminding the latecomers what to do. It was said that Zhao Prince Consort liked order. I also like order, Qingji thought to himself. There were already many people in front of him, but he wasn't too late. He obediently entered the queue. Even though he could let his attendants go, he felt that it was safer this way and that there wouldn't be any accidents. After he entered the queue, there were still people joining him. The queue was getting bigger and bigger. Not long after, a few Aboriginal ladies dressed in brightly colored clothes came to the front of the queue and said to the first person in line, "This is my seat." The first person in line was a middle-aged man in his 40s or 50s. He understood the other party's intention, smiled politely, and took 2 steps back. "There isn't enough space," that lady said with a cold face. This time, the middle-aged man's face turned ugly. The people behind him were also a little unhappy. Even though it wasn't a big deal to give a seat to an Aboriginal, the other party was being too overbearing. "Line up." At this moment, a sudden voice startled everyone. They turned around and saw a lady dressed in winged cavalry attire. She had a scorpion tattoo on her face, and her hair was in countless braids. Even though her figure wasn't considered strong, one could still see her explosive power under her animal skin clothes. "Are you talking about me?" That lady looked surprised. "Hong Xian, right? Yes, I saw you in the city before. Your grandfather is amazing, but this doesn't mean that you can break the rules set by him. Under Her Majesty's orders, we are here to maintain order. No matter who it is, we will follow Her Majesty's rules." After that lady finished speaking, everyone in the queue cheered. They didn't expect that the Aboriginals and the people of the Yun Nation would be treated equally. Today was the first time they felt carefree from the bottom of their hearts since they came to Lan City. Hong Xian stared at that winged cavalry warrior with eyes full of killing intent. Hong Xian was now at the peak of Kismet Heaven and was 1 step away from entering the Cardinal Heaven realm and becoming a top expert in Dayo. That winged cavalry warrior was only at the intermediate level of Kismet Heaven. However, he wasn't afraid of Hong Xian's identity and killing intent. He revealed a slightly cruel smile and said, "Get ready." The winged cavalry warriors at the side immediately drew their swords. A chill permeated the entire street. Each of the winged cavalry warriors, who were wearing animal skin coats and had various scars and tattoos on their bodies, had a sneer on their faces. They couldn't help but believe that if Hong Xian dared to make the slightest move, they wouldn't have any scruples about the actions of the granddaughter of the 7th most powerful expert in the world. Instead, they would truly treat her as an enemy. Hong Xian's face darkened. She hesitated for a moment and ultimately didn't dare to cause any trouble here. She glared at the other party fiercely and turned around with an ashen face. "Let's go." First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 991. Well, I got it. Rinpochen nodded his head slightly as he listened to the guard's report on the incident on Jingyang Street. There wasn't the slightest bit of surprise on Rinpochen's face, because he was the one who arranged the red thread. Previously, The empress's order in the Yun nation had strained the relationship between the two parties, and he had been looking for an opportunity to make some changes. The Yun nation was very important to Dayo. Whether it was geographical location, population, or mineral resources. He didn't want any more trouble to befall the Yun nation. The more stable that place was, the better it would be until the Yun nation became a part of Dayo. It just so happened that that old fool Hong Wu had sent a letter some time ago. The meaning of the letter was clear. The Protectorate of the North had worked hard to defend the border and had made great contributions. The Protectorate of the North needed tractors. Strategically, from tactics, from the lives of the soldiers, the importance of tractors to the Protectorate of the North. But there was only one meaning in the end. The Protectorate of the North had no money. I want a tractor, but I have no money. As for the rest, Your Majesty can arrange it as you see fit. This letter wasn't sent through the Ministry of War. Instead, it was sent directly to the Empress. That old man was simply acting like a hooligan. The Empress knew that Rinpochen was acting like a hooligan. However, after pondering for a while, she decided to allocate a batch of soldiers to him. To be honest, these tractors weren't that important to Rinpochen. He was selling them at a loss. 50 tractors were only worth 10,000 taels of silver. It didn't matter to him whether the Protectorate of the Northeast could afford it or not. But at that time, he had an idea. They were putting on a show to ease the relationship between the imperial court and the people of the Yun nation. One shouldn't underestimate this show. After all, the people from the Yun nation were people from various families or chambers of commerce. Although they weren't as powerful as the martial artists in the underworld, they had a lot of influence among the people of the Yun nation. If he could change their views, he could influence many people in the Yun nation through them. This included the scholars of the Yun nation, who loved to criticize in private. Hong Xian's identity was very suitable. Firstly, she was Hong Wu's granddaughter and could be said to have a prominent status in Dayo. If she were to act in this scene, her influence and persuasiveness would be greater. Given her status, this wasn't just a warning to the people of the Yun nation, but it was also a warning to the Aboriginals. Secondly, she didn't have any official duties and was waiting to break through to the cardinal heaven level. Cardinal heaven and Kismet heaven were like heaven and earth. Their starting points were completely different. After she broke through to the cardinal heaven level, this matter no longer affected her. Thirdly, Hong Xian was a smart person. She had improved a lot over the past few years. The two of them had a conflict in the past, and she was willing to sacrifice a little face in exchange for easing the relationship between the two of them. At the very least, she would be doing him a favor. Also, there was the tractor. Just like that, over and over again, Rinpochen only mentioned it briefly, and the other party agreed. Both sides could be said to have hit it off. Although this scene was arranged by Rinpochen, there were still some things that exceeded his expectations. The show was over before the person he arranged was even on stage. According to his plan, Hong Xian would be more aggressive, infuriated, and escalated the matter. Then, a captain of the winged cavalry would step in. But as soon as the play started, someone stopped it. "What's the name of that winged cavalry warrior?" Rinpochen asked. "Your Highness, her name is Hua Qinghua. She was recruited by Her Majesty when he went to the 60,000 mountains 3 years ago. She is now a lieutenant." Rinpochen nodded his head. Hua Qinghua was a pretty good name. Even though it messed up his acting, the way he handled things suited his taste. It would be a pity to put such a person in the winged cavalry. Also, the reaction of those winged cavalry warriors at that time was overflowing with murderous intent. They didn't back down in the face of Hong Wu's granddaughter and didn't give her any face. These people were very wild. They should have been recruited from the 60,000 mountains later. And this Hua Qinghua seemed to have a high reputation among these people. He would find an opportunity to transfer these people over to his side. Rinpochen didn't feel the slightest bit of psychological pressure when it came to poaching his wife. The Empress had a big family business and didn't lack this bit of wool. After making the necessary preparations, Rinpochen left the palace with his attendants and went to Jingyang Street. The front of the 4S shop was packed with people. The 4S shop consisted of 5 storefronts connected together and was 20 meters wide. There were 2 glass doors, and the rest were all bright floor-to-ceiling glass. It could be said that one could see everything at a glance from the outside. Inside, there was a floor, a sofa, a bar counter, and a reception room. There was also a brand new tractor in the middle. Under the illumination of the lights, the tractor was shining in the middle. He didn't know what Rinpoche was thinking, but he felt a little uncomfortable every time he saw it. If the tractor in the middle was replaced with a sports car, the incongruity would probably disappear. Rinpoche walked through the crowd with Qingyun's sword at his side to prevent assassination attempts. Although there weren't many people who dared to assassinate Rinpoche nowadays, it was still a precaution. Most of the people in the crowd were seeing Zhao Prince Consort for the first time, and they were secretly sizing him up. Rinpoche didn't care about their gazes and walked straight to the front. Someone set up a chair for him, and he turned to sit on it, facing the crowd. Everyone, there are a total of 500 tractors this time, but there are some changes to the sales method. Rinpoche said faintly. Then, facing everyone's gaze, he continued, this time, it will be an auction. The units will be batches of 5, 10, 15, 20, and the highest batch will be 30. After all, you didn't come from afar just to buy a tractor and go for a ride, right? You are right, Your Highness. The crowd didn't know what he meant, but they still answered. Rinpoche was very satisfied. These people from the Yun Nation were good at this point, and there wouldn't be an awkward silence. If it were the Aboriginals, it would be hard to say as there wouldn't even be a supporting character. Rinpoche continued, each tractor will be sold at 200 taels of silver, and the highest bidder will win. There were actually 800 tractors this time. 300 of them were reserved for the Aboriginals, and these 500 were all prepared for the people from the Yun Nation. These people were all rich, and he wasn't prepared to sell them at a loss. It wasn't good to change his mind, so he simply held an auction. As for how much they were willing to pay, that was their business. If they could really bid for each tractor at 200 taels of silver, what would be the point of giving them to them? Of course, this was impossible. Following Rinpoche's words, everyone immediately understood. After all, the Yun Nation also had auctions. Zhao Prince Consort, are you going to auction here? Everyone immediately understood what was going on. Don't worry, everyone. I'm not here today to inform you of these things. Rinpoche smiled. Please inform us, Your Highness. As far as I know, the Yun Nation has tickets, right? Rinpoche asked faintly. Everyone looked at each other and wondered why Rinpoche brought this up. Indeed, there are. Tickets were the banks on earth. After all, it was really troublesome for these merchants to carry a large amount of gold and silver for transactions. One had to know that large transactions could easily cost 10,000, 100,000, or even hundreds of thousands of taels of silver, which was really inconvenient to transport. The banks on earth had been developed since the Ming Dynasty, but the ticket banks in this world were still in their infancy. Many of them were operated by gold banks, and the capital was only a few 100,000 taels of silver. The main business was to deposit money and settle transactions in other places, but there was no interest in depositing money. Of course, the biggest problem was that the scale of these ticket banks was too small. A ticket bank that could cover dozens of cities was already considered large, and it wasn't convenient. Chapter 992. It's not convenient for you to run around with a lot of gold and silver, and it's easy for others to target you. As for the ticketing shops in the Yun Nation, I have roughly understood them. There are crooks mixed in with the honest folks, and it's very messy. With these tractors and national highways, long-distance transportation will be greatly enhanced in the future, and there will be more cases of large transactions in different places. Therefore, Deo wants to set up its own bank. It's called a bank. As soon as Rinpoche's voice fell, everyone's heart skipped a beat as they secretly pondered what he meant. Normally, those ticket companies wouldn't dare to play tricks on families like theirs. After all, the scale of the ticket shop wasn't big, and it wasn't very strong either. However, if the person in front of them cheated them of their money, they wouldn't be able to reason with him. Could it be that the other party wanted to rip off a layer of skin from them? Rinpoche looked at everyone's expressions, chuckled, and said, "Everyone, don't worry too much. It's not compulsory. I'm just taking this opportunity to say hello to everyone. As for this bank, it will be established in Lan City, Pingdu, Wangjing, Suiyuan, Qingping, and Zhuyan." Although there were only 6 cities, 5 of them covered most of the affluent areas in the Yun Nation. As for Lan City, this was usually the final destination for these merchants. For the time being, this was enough. As for the reputation of the royal family, you can rest assured. I don't care about that little bit of silver. In addition, the bank would issue paper coupons of varying amounts. The value of a paper coupon was equivalent to the value of the silver indicated on the paper. This aspect would be explained in detail later. When you deposit gold and silver in the bank, you will get paper certificates of equal value, ranging from 1 to 1,000 taels of silver, which will be enough for you to deal with any kind of situation. We don't charge you for depositing gold and silver in the bank. Only the delivery of goods in other places would be charged. The amount of your deposit determines the level of your customer. The higher the level of a customer, the lower the fee for the delivery. Rinpoche maintained a faint smile throughout. Nowadays, bank deposits pay interest. However, the people in this world had never heard of such a good thing. If he gave them interest, they would probably think that he was plotting something. After all, these families and merchants didn't believe in free lunches. Waiving the fees for their deposits was already a great benefit. Following Rinpoche's words, everyone had their own thoughts, but no one dared to speak under such circumstances. He was just thinking about his own thoughts. Their dealings with others were all through the path of business. However, the Aboriginals would never take the business path. They would always take the knife path. Therefore, even though Rinpoche had set up such a ticketing shop, they couldn't help but feel uneasy. "Everyone, you can't possibly suspect that the royal family covets you for something, right? We wouldn't dare. If you don't dare, then it means that you have doubts?" Rinpoche teased. "How could that be? We can still trust the royal family's reputation." "That would be great. No matter what you think, the reputation of the royal family is much stronger than those small banks. Moreover, do I covet your money? It's just that it's more convenient for large transactions to circulate. What I see is the whole country. I hope that the emergence of the bank can bring changes to the business model in the future." Rinpoche laughed. After trying out the convenience of the bank, Rinpoche believed that they wouldn't reject it. Even if someone really felt that it was convenient to transport a large amount of gold and silver to trade, Rinpoche would make them feel that it was inconvenient. How could there be no bandits in this day and age? The introduction of a bank, which was actually a money house, was just the first step. Next, the salaries of the various ministries and officials would be distributed through the bank. Next, the salaries of the craftsmen and workers would be distributed. According to the original agreement, it was time to distribute some salaries to the prisoners of war so that they could get used to this kind of work. It was much easier to carry out a task from top to bottom than for others to do it. Using paper money as the standard was naturally a matter of both advantages and disadvantages. There was no need to talk about the advantages. Nowadays, a large amount of copper was used as currency in the market, which made Rinpoche's heart ache. As for the disadvantages, one would know just by looking at the countries with serious inflation. However, Rinpoche already had plans to introduce a gold and silver standard. Linking the currency to gold and silver would prevent big trouble in the future. Based on the current social development of this world, it was more suitable to use gold and silver as the standard. There wouldn't be a problem for at least a few decades. Moreover, when Rinpoche came to this world, he was curious. The currency used on Earth was precious metal, and it was actually the same in this world. In particular, when he found out that the humans were exiled from the other side of the 60,000 mountains, Rinpoche was even more puzzled about how gold and silver were used as currency. It wasn't until a recent discovery in the laboratory in the mountains that he made some conjectures. There was another substance among the gold and silver in this world that was difficult to separate. It was named the singularity, which meant the beginning. This substance, called the singularity, had a very unique characteristic. It could absorb the energy released during the transformation of substances, including potential energy, chemical energy, and electrical energy. The discovery of this strange substance excited everyone in the laboratory, especially the experts in physics, chemistry, and materials science. Each of them immediately became mad scientists and didn't care about anything other than the laboratory every day. This was a huge discovery when they came to this world. It was said that according to the people in the laboratory, they often heard them muttering something like, "No bar river." Rinpoche couldn't help laughing when he heard this. This group of people seemed to have forgotten something important. However, it was good that they could do their jobs well. Although he hadn't conducted any more experiments, after learning about the existence of this substance, Rinpoche guessed that the use of gold and silver as currency was probably the currency system that humans had on the other side of the 60,000 mountains. If that was the case, this substance would probably be very useful. Huge. Alright, everyone. That's all. I've said what I wanted to say. As for the time of the auction, it will be tonight at the small arena in the east of the city. Please be prepared. Rinpoche got up and prepared to leave after finishing what he needed to say. Your Highness. Rinpoche turned his head and saw a man in his 30s. If he remembered correctly, his name was Chin. It was very similar to the name of his good friend. However, what really caught Rinpoche's attention was that after he revealed some ideas, the Chen family was the first to transport a large amount of food to and from the two places, setting an example for the other families. Rinpoche had always liked people who were so sensible and tactful. Do you still have any questions? When will this bank start, Your Highness? Our Chen family trusts Your Highness. 3 days later, Rinpoche gave him a smile. How could anyone not like such a sensible person? First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 993. The last batch of 30 tractors will be sold at 200 taels each for a total of 6,000 taels. Everyone is aware of the rules. This is the last batch of tractors for tonight and also the last chance to bid. Those who are still empty-handed, don't miss it. Following the announcement from the stage, everyone perked up. The auction was held in the arena. Other than the large area, everything else was very simple and crude. However, no one cared about such things at this time. In the previous 20 auctions, 470 tractors had been sold. Some people achieved their wishes, while others were surprised. However, the price far exceeded the starting price of 200 taels each from the first auction. 5 tractors were sold for a total of 14,000 taels, which was 14 times the starting price. This exceeded many people's expectations and set the tone for tonight's auction. Although everyone knew that the price wouldn't be as low as 200 taels each, the starting price of 2,800 taels each was still beyond many people's expectations. The last batch of 30 tractors even caused some big families and chambers of commerce to compete for them. They were flaunting their wealth, but not to the families who knew them well, but to Zhao Prince Consort, who was sitting in the VIP room at the top. 67,000 taels, 83,000 taels, 110,000 taels. Is there anyone who wants to raise the price? The person standing on the stage was a member of the Jing tribe. At this moment, he scanned the people sitting in the audience with a smile. He knew that 110,000 wasn't the starting price. The previous round had already reached 160,000 taels, and the price for this round should be even higher. Sure enough, as soon as he finished speaking, someone raised his paddle again. When the dust had settled, this batch of tractors was sold for 175,000 taels of silver. This time, the average price of the 500 tractors was close to 4,500 taels. The total price was more than 2 million taels, which was equivalent to 30% of Daio's annual income. Even the people who waved their gold to bid for these tractors couldn't help but envy his ability to amass wealth. This also made many people feel that Rinpoche's money house wasn't used to cheat people out of money. With such an ability to amass wealth, there was no need for him to do such things at the expense of his reputation, especially when the other party was the royal family. Qingji heaved a long sigh of relief. Fortunately, he had acted early this time. Although he didn't bid for the 30 tractors that were targeted, he managed to bid for a batch of 20 tractors. If he really waited until the end, the family's bottom line wouldn't be able to take down any batch of 30 tractors. No matter what, he could report back to his superiors this time. These 20 tractors were an admission ticket. Just when the crowd was calculating their gains tonight or regretting not making their move earlier, the auctioneer on the stage spoke again. Everyone, the 30 tractors just now were the last batch of tractors, not the finale of tonight's show. What comes next is the highlight of the night. As soon as he finished speaking, many people's eyes lit up. There's actually an important show tonight? He didn't know what it was. One had to know that those tractors had already been sold for more than 2 million taels of silver. The auctioneer kept everyone in suspense. Soon, the final highlight will appear in front of everyone. A group of women from the Jing tribe came to them with plates in their hands. The plate was made of wood and covered with a red cloth. It was hard to tell what was inside, but it seemed to be something very thin. When the red cloth was removed, the answer was revealed. There were only 2 pages of paper on the plate. Or rather, it was a map and a painting. Everyone picked up the drawing and painting, and their eyes narrowed. The drawing was a map of the Yun nation. The entire Yun nation was divided into 10 parts and covered with different colors. Among them, the central and eastern parts of the Yun nation had the smallest area covered by each color, but they were the richest areas in the Yun nation. What did this map mean? The painting was of a house, and there didn't seem to be anything special about it. The only thing that caught people's attention were the walls and windows of the house. One of the walls was completely made of glass, and sunlight shone directly into the house. There was a strange-looking chair with a semicircle at the bottom, and an old man was lying on it, reading a book. There was a teapot on the coffee table beside him, and outside the room, a child was squatting there with a palm leaf fan to boil water. Just by looking at the painting, one could feel the leisurely and carefree aura of the old man. Another thing that caught people's attention about this painting was that it was too realistic. It was completely different from the paintings on the market, as if a real scene had been cut out and put into the painting. What did this painting and this picture represent? After a moment, someone's eyes lit up. This painting wouldn't be meaningless. The only thing that caught people's attention in this painting was the glass-like wall. Was it related to this? Was it the finale? Everyone gradually had their own guesses. If it was really as they thought, it could indeed be considered the finale. However, what was the meaning of that map of the Yun nation? The auctioneer standing on the stage smiled and said, "I'm sure everyone has seen the items that you have won. Everyone must be guessing what the finale of tonight's show will be. Now, it's my turn to solve the mystery for everyone. Tonight's grand finale is the agency rights for these crystal-like, large-scale glass products that can bring light to everyone." The reason why it's called large-scale glass products is that this includes the rights to sell glass windows, glass doors, glass walls, glass roofs, and even glass houses and glass boats. Glass is a great discovery made by Zhao Prince Consort. Since the invention of glass, it has replaced the original paper windows and doors. Following the auctioneer's incessant bragging, everyone's faces were filled with surprise. Those who had been to Lan City naturally knew about glass. There was no need to say more about its benefits, and the market for this thing was naturally extremely huge. However, only Zhao Prince Consort and Dayo's glass factories knew how to make such crystal-like things. Although some people were tempted, no one dared to have any ideas about it. They didn't expect that this auction would actually involve glass. The question now was, what exactly did the rights to sell mean? Everyone could understand it from the literal meaning, but they wanted to hear the other party's explanation. One had to know that the actual meaning of one word could make a huge difference. Moreover, everyone was only guessing at the moment. In order to let everyone feel the changes and interest that glass brings to life and to let glass enter thousands of households, Zhao Prince Consort has decided to auction the rights to sell large-scale glass products to all of you. As for the agent, that is, the right to sell the products in this region. As long as you have this agency, you will be able to continuously customize the glass products you need and sell them. As you can see from the map, the entire Yun nation is divided into 10 regions, which means that there are a total of 10 rights to sell. In this region, all of you are the only agents. Only all of you can sell and customize these large-scale glass products in this region. No one else will intervene. Everyone, I don't think I need to tell you how much profit this is going to bring, right? This is the only industry with countless prospects, and it's the only one in this region, right? In order to ensure an adequate supply, Zhao Prince Consort will build a glass factory near Pingdu City to supply sufficient goods to all of you. Everyone was ecstatic. Before they came, they absolutely didn't expect such a good thing to happen. Just as the auctioneer said, if one monopolized the entire market in a region, everyone would fight over the prospects and profits. There was definitely no shortage of sales for things like glass. Even if it was just ordinary glass windows, as long as there was enough of it, it would be enough to multiply their net worth several times. As for the quantity, there was no need to consider it at all. How many wealthy households were there in the Yun nation? How big of a market was there? So far, this market was still unoccupied. The only thing that puzzled everyone was that their target this time was the tractor, and all the gold and silver they brought had been used up in the auction just now. Then, the auctioneer's next sentence greatly dispelled this doubt. Zhao Prince Consort has taken into account that the rights to sell for a large sum, so he doesn't require you to pay up after the auction. As long as you send the money to Lan City or the banks in Pingdu or Wangjing within a month, you will be able to pay up for this auction. Chapter 994. The competition for the regional distribution rights for the 10 glass products was much more intense than the previous tractors. Even if the tractors weren't bought this time, they could still be bought in a few months to 6 months later. As for the dealership, there wouldn't be another chance if he missed this opportunity. Of course, there was a time limit for this distribution rights, 3 years. However, as long as there was enough production, the market would be saturated in 3 years. For ordinary people, filling their stomachs, getting married, and having children were the most important things. The difference between glass and paper windows wasn't within their consideration. The target group for this product was the rich families of the Yun nation. 3 years was enough to change the appearance of all the windows in their homes. After 3 years, although there would still be a demand, it would be a steady stream. There was no one present who did not understand this principle. As a result, this auction gave Rinpochian a satisfactory answer. 13 million taels of silver. This was the price of the distribution rights alone. In the following years, they would bring him a steady stream of income. Rinpochian left the arena with satisfaction. Although he didn't need to be present for this, he was still very interested in the first investment fair that he organized. That's right. In his opinion, this was actually an investment fair. It was easy to transport small-shaped products like glass cups to the Yun nation for sale. But if he wanted to sell glass windows, it would be more troublesome. He might as well sell the distribution rights and let the people of the Yun nation do this. He could easily reap huge profits. After 3 years, the formula for the glass could also be thrown out. There was no need to keep such things that didn't require much technology in his hands. Not only glass, but many technologies would also be thrown out after he made the biggest profits. Changing the world required the efforts of the people of the world, not a single person who had to do everything himself. After returning to the palace, Rinpochian heard a yell before he entered the bedroom. It was Erhua's voice. Outside the hall, Zhu Hua, who was wearing silk clothes, was leaning against the wall and dozing off. However, her sleeves and skirt were rolled up. She preferred to wear short skirts and sleeveless clothes, and the outfit she was wearing now made her feel too restrained. Hearing Rinpochian's footsteps, Zhu Hua's eyes were hazy. When she saw Rinpochian's face, she suddenly shivered. "Greetings, Principal." Rinpochian was still a deterrent to Zhu Hua. It probably stemmed from her experience of washing toilets for 2 of her 4 years of schooling. A black shadow was swinging back and forth in the air of the hall. There were a few ropes hanging in the hall, and Erhua was holding onto the ropes, mimicking Tarzan. Upon seeing Rinpochian enter, Erhua cheered, let go of the rope, and pounced on him. Splat! She lay face down 2 meters in front of Renbachien. Renbachien felt the pain just by looking at it. Honeysuckle raised his head. There were no traces on his face, but his small face was full of grievance, and his eyes were full of tears. Renbachien didn't go forward to hug his daughter. Instead, he covered his ears with both hands and retreated out of the hall at lightning speed. Wow! A cry that was loud enough to tear the roof off spread throughout the entire palace. After a while, 2 flowers finally calmed down. Renbachien poked his head into the hall and saw Lu Hua sitting on the floor, sobbing and wiping his tears. The empress was sitting on the sofa with a calm look on her face, eating fruits from time to time. Your Majesty, is this your biological daughter? Renbachien asked. Yes, but I didn't see you catch her, the empress said with a faint smile. Renbachien spread his hands, picked up his precious Erhua, and carefully prevented her from punching his chest with her little fists. I was thinking about something just now and was a little distracted. Renbachien expressed his innocence. The empress glanced at him from the corner of her eyes. This excuse wasn't sincere at all. Boo-hoo! Erhua's face twitched, and the corners of her eyes drooped. She looked like she was about to cry again. Hey, Erhua, you are already a big girl. It's time for you to learn to face reality and setbacks, Renbachien said sincerely, and his face was full of love. I have never seen a father like you, the empress said sarcastically. Which father have you seen? Renbachien asked. The empress immediately fell into deep thought. At least she had seen her own father before. Even though she couldn't see him most of the time, he was always busy, always very dignified and very fierce. However, he was still good to her. She remembered that she once broke a bottle of his precious medicine and got beaten up. Do you know, my heart hurts when I beat you up. But after I beat you up, my heart feels much better. After thinking about it, the empress was slightly depressed. Forget it, let's not talk about this anymore. The empress shook her head and chased away the depression in her heart. She was afraid that if she continued thinking about it, the good impression that the late emperor had left in her heart would disappear. How's the auction going? Your Majesty, guess how much silver did we win this time? Renbachien immediately laughed. This was a number that could surprise the empress. One had to know that the income of the imperial family was only about 100,000 taels of silver a year. To describe the imperial family of Dayo as unlucky was a little insulting. To be honest, those chiefs were much wealthier than the imperial family of Dayo. Renbachien laughed as he put honeysuckle on his neck. Then he felt 2 small hands wrapping around his head and twisting it to one side. He was scared out of his wits and shouted, "Honeysuckle, let go of me." If she were to twist him off. Renbachien didn't know if the ointment in this world could save a person whose head was twisted 360 degrees. Renbachien pulled the little fellow down from his neck and slapped her butt. Did I say that? You're not allowed to hit my chest with your little fists or twist my head. You're not allowed to hit my stomach with your head and act like a spoiled child. The little fellow was shocked by Renbachien's stern words and expression, and her eyes were full of tears. You scared her, the empress said faintly. She scared me just now. Renbachien was still a little shaken. You have been slacking ever since you returned from the 60,000 mountains. In the empress's heart, Renbachien's cultivation had always been a big problem. However, to Renbachien, cultivation was for the sake of marrying the empress. Now that he had married the empress, the importance of cultivation was greatly reduced. As for personally stabbing people with a gun, Renbachien was quite excited for a period of time after experiencing the thrill of being unparalleled. However, it didn't take long for him to put this matter aside. Of course, there was another important result of cultivation, which was to prolong one's lifespan. However, Renbachien felt that it wouldn't be a problem for him to attain the spirit wheel level. To others, the Tongtian Gate was a hurdle that would allow them to become a dragon overnight if they succeeded and fall into the abyss if they failed. However, for Renbachien, it could be smoothly passed. As long as he cultivated slowly, he would attain the spirit wheel level one day. Then he would just have to wait for the medicine on Earth to reverse aging and prolong life. After much difficulty, Renbaqian managed to coax Honeysuckle and threw her to Zhu Hua to rest before the two of them continued their previous conversation. How much? The Empress's voice was slightly higher. The tractor and the dealership for glass products, 15 million taels of silver. Renbaqian stretched out his 5 fingers and waved them in the air. That's equivalent to 2 years of the previous imperial court's income. The Empress sighed. Seeing how Renbaqian easily obtained 2 years' worth of income from Dayo's imperial court, the Empress began to feel a little unbalanced. Just the glass products alone will bring back more than 10 million taels of profit in the next 3 years. Renbaqian stretched out 2 more fingers and sighed. Now we have the money to build the new palace. The Empress suddenly lifted her leg and kicked Renbaqian off the sofa. What are you doing? Renbaqian fell to the ground in a daze. It's nothing. I feel much better now. After the Empress finished speaking, she thought about it and laughed again. Then she burst out laughing. Chapter 995. He had just looked for an editor to edit it. He had thought that he had written more than 1,000 chapters, but it turned out that there were only 972 chapters. The messed-up chapter names of The Pretty Boy of the Empress's Family had been changed. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 996. I heard that you robbed more than 10 million taels of silver last night? Tong Jingye mysteriously whispered into Renbaqian's ear. Tong Jingye wasn't the only one who was shocked by this news. The others were the same. After court was dismissed, Tong Jingye saw Renbaqian returning to the palace from the academy and immediately pulled him aside. The others also slowed down a little and pricked up their ears. It's for sale. Remember, it's for sale. Renbaqian corrected him. Will they be the ones selling the glass in the future? Tong Jingye asked as he smacked his lips. Yes, I sold the dealership. Renbaqian nodded. There was nothing to hide about this. They are willing to pay such a high price for it, which means that they can earn more money, right? Tong Jingye asked again. Indeed. Renbaqian continued to nod. Tong Jingye then understood and said disdainfully, I've always heard people talk about squandering, but I've seen it for myself today. Renbaqian almost spat blood on his face. Tong Jingye was humbly asking for advice just now, but he turned hostile so quickly. Am I smarter or are you smarter? Renbaqian asked with his eyes wide open. Tong Jingye put his hands on his hips and laughed. Don't you have any idea how smart you are to ask such a question? Renbaqian was so angry that he spat at Tong Jingye's face. Tong Jingye swayed his head and dodged it perfectly. He clicked his tongue and said, You are angry out of humiliation. Renbaqian felt that if he had a beard, it would be standing up by now. Tong Jingye, this old man, really made people want to vomit blood. Even so, the fact that Renbaqian had amassed 15 million taels of silver this time still shocked the officials. If it wasn't for the fact that Renbaqian sold a chicken that could lay golden eggs, many of them would have asked him how to earn money. Shi Qing sat in the courtyard and laughed. Does he lack a chicken that can lay golden eggs? As for Tong Jingye, he was all smiles when he returned to his residence. Grandpa, I heard that you went to provoke Yagüe? Tong Lan asked with a smile during dinner. Tong Lan was now 14 years old, and her figure had become slender and elegant. People couldn't help but lament that this girl had grown up. Grandpa is speaking the truth. Tong Jingye stroked his long beard and laughed. Do you really think he sold it wrongly? Tong Lan continued asking. Tong Jingye rubbed her head. Does he look like a fool to you? Yes. Tong Lan nodded and said, If others treat him as a fool, then they are the real fools. That's right. Then what are you going to do? My classmate almost died of laughter when he heard about it. Then he told me about it. Tong Lan pouted unhappily. Otherwise, I'm afraid he'll be in some trouble during this period. Who still dares to find trouble with him? It was good enough that he didn't cause trouble for others. His Majesty is biased, always biased towards him. Sigh, Your Majesty, you've changed. Tong Jinye looked unhappy at the mention of this matter. Why was he always the one getting beaten up every time he went to the brothel with Zhao Prince Consort? His Majesty wasn't like this before. Wasn't this a little too open and aboveboard? Tong Jinye then said, no one dares to cause trouble for him, but there are still many people who want to ask him for advice on how to make money. This doesn't matter, but the Ministry of Works is still waiting for his so-called mother machine. It's not appropriate for him to be bothered by people all the time. He doesn't know that you are being kind. Tong Lan curled her lips and felt that Tong Jinye was doing a thankless job. As for the importance of the mother machine, she knew it. Yagüe often said that the mother machine was an industrial mother machine. With the mother machine, more sophisticated equipment could be manufactured, and with more sophisticated equipment, more sophisticated instruments and parts could be manufactured. In fact, Tong Lan's batch of students learned the most and had the best combination of learning and practice. The rest of the students played with what they had left. As a result, Renbaqian was most satisfied with the outlook and way of thinking of Tong Lan and the other students. You just said that anyone who thinks he's a fool is really a fool. Tong Jinye laughed heartily. If he knew that Renbaqian had scolded him after returning to the palace, he definitely wouldn't have laughed so happily. If it were someone else, Renbaqian might have thought about the reasons behind it. But Tong Jinye, In any case, after the auction ended, Renbaqian took this opportunity to earn a large sum of money that could be used to invest in the construction of the new palace. Many chambers of commerce and families in the Yun nation also took this opportunity to get acquainted with Renbaqian and get a hen that could lay golden eggs for 3 years. It could be said that both parties were happy. The scene that happened in front of the Tractor 4's shop that day also became a topic of discussion among a small number of people. Subsequently, it spread to the ears of many rich families and scholars. From this incident, it could be seen that the upper echelons of the Aboriginals were indeed different from before, and the core of this change was Zhao Prince Consort. Merchants preferred a peaceful and prosperous world, not a world of blood and fire. In troubled times, human lives were as cheap as dogs. No matter how rich they were, they couldn't guarantee the safety of their families. From the current point of view, the situation was still developing in a stable direction. If this continued, even if the Yun nation changed owners, they might still be able to continue living a wealthy life. In addition, another point was that after 2 trips on the official road from Lan City to the Yun nation, the official road paved with marble slabs wasn't pleasing to the eye. The width of the former was 4 times that of the latter. When one lifted the curtain and looked out, one could see everything at a glance. It was extremely spacious, and it was hard to believe that it was built by 100,000 people in 3 years. The smoothness of the cement road and the stone road couldn't be compared at all. This feeling was even more obvious when one was sitting in a carriage. It was said that the Aboriginals' carriages used a material called rubber, which was much more stable than their carriages. Unfortunately, it couldn't be bought at the moment. It was said that the road from Lan City to the Qin nation was being built, and it was unknown whether the road to the Yun nation would be built in the future. Renbaqian was sitting in the rearguard commandery with Hua in his arms. Remember, let the strong men assist the soldiers and maintain order. There are so many people here, and we can't let anything go wrong. If there are any problems, report them immediately, Renbaqian instructed the people below. Understood. Renbaqian nodded and dismissed the people. He knocked on the table and said, Lieutenant Hua Qinhua, let her in. A moment later, a woman in a leather coat with a long saber at her waist, braided hair, and a scorpion tattoo on her face strode in. She looked around as she walked and asked, Zhao Prince Consort, why did you call me here? Renbaqian sized her up. Previously he was far away, and there were more people around, so he couldn't see her clearly. It had to be said that the corners of her eyes and eyebrows were fierce, and it was somewhat less attractive on a woman's face. However, this didn't matter to her. He liked her way of doing things. Are you interested in changing positions? Renbaqian asked with a smile on his face. What do you mean? Hua Qinghua widened her eyes and asked without any hesitation. Well, I think you do a good job. It's a pity to leave you in the winged cavalry. I'm not looking down on the winged cavalry, but I'm afraid that there will be fewer battles in the future. If a person like you is placed in another position, he or she will be able to play a greater role and better contribute to the construction of Dayo's society. Hua Qinghua scratched her head and looked puzzled. Zhao Prince Consort, are you going to change my position? Simply put, that's it. Ren Baqian nodded. Is there anyone who wants to fight? Is there a fight? Isn't it exciting? Hua Qinghua's eyes lit up. I've been bored out of my mind recently. Maybe there is. Ren Baqian set a distant goal for her. Fight with Zidonglai. Isn't it exciting? I can't beat him. Hua Qinghua said frankly. Ren Baqian laughed. What a straightforward character. Zidonglai was the protector general of the Northeast and the Yun nation's god of death. Hua Qinghua didn't even mention whether she dared to or not and just said that she couldn't beat him. Hua Qinghua, who was in his arms, looked around. Seeing that Ren Baqian wasn't paying attention to her, she sneakily picked up an ink stone from the table and put it in her mouth. Cut. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile, you're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.